Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you're watching fourth and final part of What If Experimented Naruto Was Saved by Kurama Kushina Minato. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
His life consisted solely of suffering and rage. Longer than anyone would have thought possible, there hadn't been a never-ending, shifting pain that ate away at the mind, shattering all thoughts of good. He resisted the shift in his emotions, but he was losing because his teammates turned into tools instead of friends. Friends turned into possible enemies, and anyone who had more than he did turned into a true enemy for stealing what should have been his. He opened the Sharingan out of desperation, and things worsened. The paper with the seal breaker had been draining his chakra to support the destruction of those 3 seals, or any seal, really, except the ones Orochimaru had placed, as soon as it had come into contact with the triple seal surrounding the curse mark. Thus, Sasuke was able to relive the events of the night his brother had murdered every member of his own clan. And a new viewpoint emerged. One of the memories. Itachi's family and clan did not automatically trust him as much as everyone outside the Uchiha might have thought. Sasuke was. If the person who delivered the lethal blows had been someone they trusted, the murderer would not have approached. In a single night, someone destroyed the Uchiha, who had been plotting against the Hokage to regain their proper position and authority. At this moment, Sasuke experienced the most intense, agonizing realization he had ever had. That night, Itachi hadn't been in the Uchiha compound. In actuality, he hadn't done anything in the district that evening. However, he managed to kill every Uchiha in some way, so he had to have someone else do it for him. Whoever that person was, they had only served as his weapon and tool against his clan, and the only reason he had survived was not because his brother had failed to kill him, but rather because of this very moment. Sasuke, his brother's stand-in and puppet, had been the one destroying his clan, not Itachi. He wouldn't have a weapon that works destroy itself, of course. Orochimaru had created the curse marks to achieve 2 objectives. In order to boost the bearer's power, which had to come from somewhere, the mark transformed potential life span into chakra. This technique was prohibitively effective, greatly increasing the bearer's abilities, possibly to Jinchuriki levels, but it also ate away at their life at an increasingly high cost. The bearer's judgment, sanity, and sense of right and wrong were then corroded by the imbalance. As the mark grew, darker actions were reduced to a minor cost. If the Uchiha Sharingan's power was applied excessively or for an extended period of time, the results were similar. The second objective was to lessen the mind's resistance and inhibitions so that Orochimaru could more easily take that body if necessary. Or should the whim get the better of him? Collectively, these characteristics blended into the boy's body, drawing on all the anger and suffering, all the bad things that Sasuke was only starting to get over, and overpowering his frail mind. All he could do was cling to one thought, one memory, one glimmer of hope. There was a tiny core, an image of a girl with pink hair, deep within all the pain and rage. The splintered pieces of the tub the Auto Elite had their prisoner in caused Kimimaro to collapse, dead as a doornail. All of the boy's pain, suffering, and rage began to pour out of him, burning the grass around him to feed the black chakra flames that swirled and danced around his body. As he turned and saw someone with a power that should have been his pure black eyes scanned the surroundings, assaulted. A stray ribbon of power brushed against Naruto's arm, tearing it open in a gout of gore as he was flung end over end towards the tree line. Naruto barely escaped the attack, which included a stream of black lightning that tore up the ground where he had been standing. He looked at the wound to see how much damage had been done, idly observing that it did not appear to be healing. As though the chakra that would have been used to repair the wound had been blocked or burned out. He thought, that can't be a good sign. As Naruto kicked back to his feet and the dark Sasuke charged, closing the gap. The dark Sasuke reached out for Naruto as Hinata emerged and struck with gentle fist and gentle storm, respectively, but to no avail. Akamaru whimpered and cowered deeper into Kiba's jacket as Hinata hurried in to stop Sasuke during her husband's attack. The 2 shinobi she had left to watch exchanged glances for a moment. The Inuzuka told his teammate, Akamaru isn't in a position to assist them, Sakura, and I'm not good enough to beat Sasuke when he's holding back. We'll go for more help. You back up those 2 and try to stop him, or at least keep him in place. Sakura ran toward the battle while Kiba ran back along their trail in the hopes of finding someone who could assist. When she noticed that even Naruto wasn't healing as quickly as he usually did, the black flames frightened her even more. In contrast to his typical Gon. Before he realizes he's been hurt pace, the blonde's wounds were closing, but it seemed like a long and drawn-out process. Normally, you could see the injuries healing before your eyes. The black flames surrounding Sasuke had slightly burned Hinata's palms, even though the chakra she used for her fighting style protected them. She purposefully stopped the flow of her chakra for a short while, using the flames that had been consuming it as fuel. With his striking surfaces plated in bone metal, Naruto struck Sasuke from the side. Knees, elbows, knuckles. Bringing his claws in to slug his fellow shinobi with some common sense. Sakura leapt past Hinata and slashed her hand into the opening created when Naruto landed a knee strike to intercept Sasuke's flame-covered fist. The attack was stopped cold by Sakura's hand, allowing the blonde shinobi to force the Uchiha back. The black flames hurt and attempted to consume the blue energy of his chakra, making it painful to maintain conflict as the two traded blows. Hinata fell back a little, breathing heavily. But it was not her hand catching fire that caused the sting and burning sensation in her palm. Sakura started thinking more quickly and intensely than she had ever done as she gazed at her unmarked palm for a moment. Because of her academic prowess, rather than her actual shinobi skills, she had received the highest grade of kunoichi. The black chakra was being struck and absorbed by Naruto's attacks. Similar to the kick he just executed with his heel that was plated in bone metal. Sasuke hardly noticed it, even though it should have broken his jaw and pushed the Sharingan user's momentum sideways for a considerable distance. And as he did, Naruto was getting burned. Hinata had similar issues, and in each attack they launched, the two of them behaved as partners should. Nothing was functioning. And Sakura realized they were powerless to stop Sasuke. They couldn't make an effective hit with these black chakra flames. Hinata grabbed Sasuke's left arm, ignoring the hiss of burning flesh and the smoky odor that overwhelmed her senses. She was wondering how Naruto, who had far more sensitive senses, was able to continue. She was under a lot of pressure and wished that Ninja Wire had helped, even though it was his weak arm. Or even that she was carrying some. She was startled by the abrupt jerk as Sasuke came to a halt. As he performed a virtual mirror image maneuver, Naruto apparently had a similar thought process. He had Ninja Wire, which he spooled around the Uchiha's wrists. As soon as he anchored it in kunai that he threw to the trees, the wire proceeded slowly up the spectrum through reds of brighter hues, rapidly approaching yellow as Sasuke, who had not yet made a coherent sound other than grunts and roars, strained and struggled against his bonds. Unaffected by the black flames blazing from his body, Sakura surprised them both by simply approaching Sasuke and putting her arms around him. She then planted a firm and genuine kiss on his lips, shocking him into immobility. With a muttered, "I'm sorry," she withdrew and met his eyes, seeing the anguish and suffering, the unmatched abyss of despair and rage that she could not bear without shattering. He croaked out in a broken voice, and she saw his eyes, the red Sharingan eyes marked by Tomo. With difficulty, he swallowed, "Forgive. You gotta be stopped before I kill someone." He fought back the unstoppable tide of everything bad that had happened in his life, keeping it all at bay with the one bright moment that was fading now that the black flames of the curse Mark knew what to destroy. His eyes turned completely black again as Sakura raised her chakra sheathed hand and, with tears streaming down her face so intensely that she was unable to see anything, drove her fist through his heart, shattering her own heart. "Thank you, Sakura." The chakra explosion was not unnoticed, and Konoha's backup teams, who had been gathered and sent out as soon as they were available, sped through the trees. Kakashi was the first to discover them, but Guy, Anko, and others quickly followed. The black flames had severely damaged Sasuke's body, making it hardly recognizable. Sakura did not respond. In an instant, her right arm was gone, burned to ash and extending to her shoulder. Shizune, who led the first medic.nin team to arrive, initially diagnosed her with shock-induced catatonia because her eyes didn't focus properly. Hinata and Naruto, on the other hand, received mere burns and were rendered unconscious, but otherwise received very little punishment. Hinata was entangled in her husband's arms, the Jinchuriki seemingly protecting her from the burns that were gradually healing. The concerning aspect of that was the Yuki threads that moved back and forth between the two, healing wounds that somehow lacked the normal blue chakra that all living things had. They had to return everyone to Konoha as quickly as possible because this was a very odd and dangerous situation. As he watched the enormous number of Konoha shinobi scatter across the area where the fight had occurred, Orochimaru was gritting his teeth and could hardly control his rage. The renegade Sannin had slipped through the Valley of the End and found the battleground because he was tired of waiting. His impatience also contributed to his numerous failed experiments, though he wouldn't acknowledge any flaws in himself. However, He discovered it much too late. Orochimaru could see remnants of the battle still etched into the surrounding terrain, but the shinobi had already removed the bodies and survivors. Once more, he controlled his destructive impulse. If any of these shinobi were more powerful than they appeared, it wouldn't be worth it to lash out here with no real reward and run the risk of being captured, and started to move away. He required more details. Tsunade observed that none of the 3 people who had survived the fight with Sasuke were waking up. Despite the injury that had taken her arm, she could see from the charts and reports that Sakura's issue was not physical in nature. Yamanaka Inoichi was still trying to carefully sort through the girl's disorganized memories. Regarding the pink-haired girl's mind, his account of the altercation was bleak. "She's hiding, Tsunade." Sama, the head of Yamanaka, clarified. It wasn't so much the shock of her arm being destroyed, as it was her realization that Sasuke was already too far broken and had to be stopped. And that as powerful and strong as Naruto and Hinata had become, they weren't able to do it while she was. And had to. He breathed deeply, aware of the minefield he was about to enter. "I'd imagine that you had a similar episode after, Dan." Tsunade's scowl arose and fixed itself on the Walker's face. She stared at the young Kunoichi for a moment before collapsing back into a chair. "That's none," she said. "No," she sighed. "You're right. What repercussions can you see from this? If she recovers from the emotional trauma of having to kill her own teammate, the boy she may well have loved, and who apparently thought enough of her that she was the only one he'd ever let in, you mean?" The brunette Junin sighed. "All she really has left is being a shinobi. Her father's working on the police force here, and her mother's on the council representing the clanless shinobi, but neither one will ever fully understand what she's going through. I'd suggest keeping her as Kakashi's genin. He'll understand what she's going through, like no one else ever will. And probably assigning them to some minor ambassadorial duties for a while. If Danzo managed council duties with one arm, she should manage at least assistance duties. If there were some sort of prosthetic for her, that would probably help her out, too. I'd not try to disguise it though. If she were to associate it with her old arm, she may well do herself an injury." He sighed. "That's all, if, mind you. As for when, I have no idea. I don't even know if she'll remember it." After the Hokage nodded, she put on the hat, the only one mentioned in the village, and walked out of the room. Anyone could have a hat, but the Hokage wore the hat. She entered a different room 3 doors down. "Jiraiya, Shizune," she said to the 2 specialists who guarded the 2 people in the room. "In a single bed. A report and some tea, please." Jiraiya started making the tea with her former apprentice. "It's Yuki, all right, the pure stuff, too. The thing is, his seal is locked down tight. The way it's designed, this stuff can't be, the fox's chakra. But it has to be, there's no other explanation. It seems to be acting in some unique way, and I have no idea how. It's almost as if Naruto himself was guiding this energy in whatever it's doing, but he's unconscious, so that can't be it." There was only one stalk floating upright in the teacup, which Shizune handed over. The medic.nin continued where Jiraiya had left off, while Tsunade blinked at the omen. "Their wounds are healing slowly, and being specifically targeted by the Yuki to be rebuilt. It's the only way to explain it, but there may be side effects we can't predict. Whatever those black flames were, they would consume the chakra within a living thing to fuel themselves, but in the case of Uchiha Sasuke, and I suspect anyone in his situation, it seems to burn through their potential chakra first. When I examined the body, all the potential lifespan was burned out by the black chakra." That gave Jiraiya Sama some ideas about the function of the seal, which may allow us to remove the one on Mitarashi Anko. Turning her attention to the mattresses, burns, that were clearly recovering, she shook her head and motioned for the Toad Sage to take over the conversation. "Our techniques and medical jutsu were useless. They need a chakra system to work with. The black chakra burns out that system. What's happening here? It looks like their systems are being rebuilt by Yuki, and there's something else, something we just can't understand." Tsunade made the decision to probe Jiraiya for information because she appeared hesitant. She believed she could cope with nightmares, but the spy master was shaking his head. "Does this have to do with why they're in the same bed? Nightmares again?" she asked. "I wish it was nightmares, but the truth is, if Hinata is taken from the Gaki's arms, she starts to crash. Her vitals drop, and she starts to die. It looks like toxic chakra shock, but faster." Tsunade gazed while Shizune completed her report. "It's almost like she's become dependent on the Yuki to live," she stated, "but unlike Naruto and his passenger, she doesn't generate Yuki herself. We, and I use that term collectively about all the medics and doctors here except maybe you, have no idea where to even start to deal with this. Shoji and Ino led Otome down the hallways while she sat in the wheelchair. The Hyaku Hoseki line retained the main Uzumaki bloodline, but the something extra they possessed was incorporated into the skin of stone. She was only going to be off this leg for a few weeks due to the Katsuryoku's faster healing. Only Naruto had the super charged version, the Sokai Katsuryoku, though she could be healed more quickly in an emergency. However, the doctors advised her to let it heal naturally because her condition at the time of the injury had made the break worse. It would be an understatement to say that she was not entirely happy with this development. This was still where Naruto and Hinata were. Go to sleep. After 3 days, everyone else received a debriefing and an update on the situation. It was emphasized that nobody was at fault, even though the mission had technically failed and the target they were sent to save had died during the mission. Aside from the individual who initially applied the curse mark, everyone but the Uzumakis and Sakura had been sent home after the mission, and after action reports were analyzed and the mental health evaluations of all those involved were completed quickly. For missions, Kiba was temporarily assigned to Team 10, but Shinshi Sensei didn't mind at all. Kiba had gulped after glancing at the man's smirk. When his daughter and her friends came out of the hospital, Ishiguma was waiting outside. He spoke as they got to him. He said, "I heard about a strange new maneuver, which made the young Akamichi and his daughter tense. This Uzumaki combination may be a good idea, but obviously we will need more than one such option to make it a true path. And we will have to work on the theories behind it to eliminate such a cost as it currently has." His motion was to plaster her leg from hip to heel. But this Akamichi catapult, most effective and impressive. I am proud. When Otome put a hand on each of the people closest to her, Shoji and Ino appeared ready to object verbally to the gentle tone of this statement. She clarified, "This is my father," as they paused. She bowed to her father as best she could in her current state and said, "This is his equivalent of Naruto." Sama's wildest cheers and exhortations, with a parade down the center of the village for good measure. "I thank you for your attention, Odo. Sensei, you honor me." Ishiguma was surprised and perplexed by the embrace because she wasn't a man who made dramatic emotional outbursts. He answered, "No, dear daughter, you honor me. My greatest desire is that one day, not too far off I think, I might be proud to be known as your father." Even for Kurama, this was the first time. Not once had one of his hosts succeeded in introducing another person into their mental landscape during his 1,000 years of life. Though he reluctantly acknowledged to himself that in this instance, he was unsure of the precise duration of his years, so 1,000 years simply meant a very long time. While they were both unconscious, he could see the terrible damage they had both sustained when they had first appeared. The girl, his host's mate, was severely injured, as if something had burned away the very channels of her chakra network, because Naruto's scent was all over her in a way that made no other sense. He could see that Naruto was experiencing the same thing, and even as he watched, he could see the damage spreading very slowly, in both of them. The fox sighed and turned to face the boy, the young man he had actually introduced himself as. As long as they had lasted, the Kyuubi no Yoko's power had been used for something other than destruction under the guidance of the two chakra presences. It had felt strange, but, in some ways, enhancing the boy had been far more fulfilling than the numerous fatalities and extensive areas of devastation the Biju had wrought during his lengthy existence. As he examined the damage, he let out another sigh. He had the ability to heal the boy and give him immunity, and he had been doing just that. He had also acted in the same manner toward the girl, the Hinata. Even the difference between his and her chakras had been resolved, but there was still another issue that he had not anticipated. As he rebuilt her system, he eventually got to the point where the system itself depended on the Yuki doing the repairs. He would have to give her a means of producing her own Yuki if she were to survive. He could do this by transforming both of them into full-blooded or half-blooded demons, or he could seal another Biju or lesser demon into her, for which the Gaki would never forgive him. Since full demons could not contain other full demons without one devouring the other, it was tempting to push it so far that they became demons, a kind of celestial get out of jail free card. However, that would make him feeble and open to attack by the person who had tricked him into attacking Konoha twice, and that result was unacceptable. In order to change what the Yuki was doing, he drew them nearer and dragged them alongside the bars of his cage. They would wind up full kitsune if he wasn't careful, which would undoubtedly reveal the game. He'd taken enough Yuki to put him to sleep for 3 years the first time he'd done this. This would require a lot more work. Naruto's hand moved, and the Yuki that followed it started painting a seal on Hinata's belly while she was unconscious in the private room, where Shizune slept close by, prepared to act if they woke up. Tsunade greeted Shino at the hospital's doors as he arrived to visit his teammates Kuranai, Sensei and Anko. After careful consideration, the council had determined that the purple-haired special Jonin would never again be allowed to lecture or teach at the academy. The woman was pleased because this had been part of what she had been trying to achieve. Over 50 full-grown men and women reported having nightmares about the kunoichi and her snakes, suggesting that the legend of Anko was more concerned with frightening young children, and not so small, than with any real actions. When Anko instructed him to fetch the group's water, one of the kids, a gregarious civilian kid who was clearly his father's favorite, had a falling out. "I don't have to listen to my own mother," he'd stated, "so why should I listen to you?" The brat had almost been broken by Anko's sly grin alone, but her subsequent speech put an end to it. "Because your parents aren't here to stop me putting snakes in your bed." For the remainder of the journey, the boy had behaved like a true angel. By the time they got back, they had decided to all arrive at the same time because the rescue mission had been completed for the previous few days. Anko was probably only down here because Tsunade had told her to speak with Jiraiya about fresh information regarding the curse, Mark's effects and a potential way to get rid of it. The enthusiasm of the Jonin had been embarrassing. "If he can get this off me," she had declared, "I'd have his baby." She later realized what she had said, and everyone in the room received death threats. To cheer her up, a laughing Tsunade had nodded and referred to it as an S-rank secret. They heard Shizune startle when they knocked on the door, more out of courtesy than a desire to see if their friends were awake. The four of them froze at what they saw when the door opened and they entered. Though Shino's Kakaichu were telling him something was different, the couple in the bed was essentially the same as they had always been. The young Aburame had deduced that much from the moment he saw Hinata's cheeks, which had whisker marks that matched her husband's, their pointed, fox-like ears in place of their previous ones, and their black, hard nails, which resembled animal claws. The silence was broken by Tsunade. This could be quite a problem. A familiar warmth pressed against Hinata as she woke up, and she stretched a little. When she opened her eyes, the Hokage was standing there, staring at her with Kuranai, Shizune, and Shino. She wondered what was happening and reached up to rub her sleep-deprived eyes before stopping. The distinction between her fingernails now and when she was fighting Sasuke was important. They were solid black, more securely fixed, rounder than flat, and looked like nothing more than a dog's or wolf's claws. Or a fox. She noticed the same thing when she looked down at Naruto's hand resting on her stomach, which made her ears relax. As she turned to face Naruto, she reached up and felt at the pointed, red, furred ears on either side of her head. This in turn roused her husband, who started to massage his still closed eyes. His ears, which were the same size as hers, drooped slightly, revealing the black tips that she was now positive adorned her own ears as well. She let out a little gasp when she saw his eyes open. The blonde Jinchuriki's eyes remained the same color, but their shape was different. Clearly, that had changed. The fox's eyes were clearly visible, with a cat-like slit pupil. His gaze met hers, and she saw a glimpse of her own eyes. Her eyes were identical except for the color, which was a deep shade of amethyst. In a panic, Hinata pushed her left hand into Naruto's shorts waistband without considering their presence. She sighed with relief when she was unable to locate a fox tail and squeezed her husband tightly. They both blushed fiercely as Kuranai cleared her throat to let the young shinobi couple know they weren't alone. After assisting her teammate Otome in leaving the hospital, Ino entered the building and went back to Sakura's room. Despite their rivalry over Sasuke, the pink-haired girl remained her friend, and Ino felt a great deal of sympathy for Sakura, even though their mutual crush had made him take a closer look at his teammate. Witnessing his death would have been a terrible mental trauma. Despite this, Ino had believed Sakura was a bit more powerful. Why did it do this to her, and what had happened to him? Carefully feeding her catatonic friend, the blonde made sure she ate everything that was put in her mouth. Even as she forced the memories of the six-armed man out of Kidomaru's mind, Ino had thought the cesspool in his head was awful enough. However, Sakura lacked a release valve of that kind, and she had been largely shielded by the training her father had given her. While waiting was all Ino could do for Sakura at the moment, she wished she could do more for her. But Ino was not the type to sit still, and her blonde friend was worried by the pink-haired kunoichi's lifeless, dull stare. The Uzumaki couple's initial panic upon discovering their new transformations was short-lived, and Naruto, in particular, found Hinata's facial whisker marks to be cute. In fact, distractingly so. Tsunade and Shizune could only sense that they were in excellent health and prepared to fight, suggesting that the different medical procedures to ascertain what was happening were apparently insufficient. However, their change, no matter how slight, was completely unanticipated. It was discovered that Hinata's senses and healing rate were comparable to Naruto's, as though his bloodline limit had been successfully implanted in her. It's practically a limit breaker, if you will. After some experimentation, it was discovered that she still possessed the Byakugan, but her eyes had changed, with the entire eye turning that striking amethyst purple. It looks like both of you have already made a full recovery, which was worrying me, Tsunade informed them. Large sections of the chakra network in Hinata's hand and arms and legs, and the same for you Naruto, had been burned away, is the best way I can describe it, because the chakra coils were destroyed, the chakra flow wasn't getting where it had to go, so there was no healing, either naturally or through jutsu, that we could assist with. Worse, it was slowly eating away at you, spreading the damage. The only thing that stopped it was the Yuki of the Kyuubi. And we have no idea how he managed to do any of this. He would have to have rebuilt a lot of your chakra networks from scratch. We could actually see that happening at the time. The tea Shizune had provided. Jiraiya seized the opportunity to talk. What worried us then was the way the two of you seemed to need the Yuki to survive. Since Naruto has the fox in his seal, we weren't as concerned for him, but as far as we knew, Hinata had no such resource to draw upon. He was staring at them up and down. He looked directly into the curious eyes and said, "But what's happened is something I never would have expected in longer than the Kyuubi no Yoko has existed. It seems, in order to give you two the ability to survive the reconstruction of your chakra networks, the Kyuubi has pretty much given you the ability to generate your own Yuki. Although exactly what you can do with it is completely unknown. But the side effects. Your chakra reserves have increased, both of you, and in general your chakra is more potent. Physically, you'll be a bit stronger and faster, tougher too, but you'll have to get used to it. There's a serious downside to it all, though. The physical changes are obvious if you're looking at them, and while you're more powerful, there's a lot of seals in certain places that the two of you simply can't go anymore. Shrines and temples, especially." With a catch in his voice, Naruto questioned, "So you're saying we aren't human any longer?" While they awaited Tsunade's decision, Hinata put her arms around him. Peeved. "Of course you're still human," explained the Hokage. "If anything, you're more than human, but the human part is there, because we can still see Naruto and Hinata. The ears and eyes are going to take some getting used to though." Naruto remarked, "It could be worse, we could have woken up with tails." When she opened her eyes, the world was no longer covered in the drab gray that had pervaded it for so long. She glanced down at Ino's long blonde ponytail and the pudding dish that the other girl had, presumably, given that Ino showed no signs of eating it. She froze as she reached out to shake her friend's shoulder. The loss nearly sent her into a panic. Where did my arm go? She thought frantically. Although the shoulder was delicate and sensitive, it was nearly excruciating to feel the ghost of her actual arm, with her hand flexing in front of her. As she withdrew her hand from the flame, a flash of black fire turned white in her memory. Whatever had happened was obscured by a hazy blur, and her mind would not go any farther. She gritted her teeth and pushed and prodded at her memory, lifting the fog's edges and looking underneath. Her cry of agony and despair roused Ino, who immediately woke up and sobbed uncontrollably while clutching her best friend. This was encouraging, according to her mother's explanations as a therapist, especially since the pink-haired girl was now able to concentrate and put her lone arm around her friend while she sobbed. Sakura muttered, "Sorry, Ino. Just barely audible. I don't deserve a friend like you. Or Kiba, or even Naruto. It was all me." The blonde said, "Sakura, it's all right," unsure of how to respond to her friend's statement but resolved to offer encouragement. Sakura tensed as she said, "All the enemy ninja are dead or captured, so there'll be justice for whoever killed Sasuke. You wait and see." Ino pondered why, stepping back to observe the other girl's terrified expression. Sakura was frozen. Ino was unaware. She didn't even think it might happen. The girl with only one arm drew in a sob. She murmured, I can't say it, Ino," her voice a little croaky from lack of use. As Ino performed the hand seals to mind. "Walk." She pointed at her forehead and then, remembering her missing right hand, pointed again with her left, wondering if she would ever get used to it. You better step inside and see it for yourself." They were able to hide their fox-like features with Naruto's henge jutsu. The transformation was invisible even to Hinata's Byakugan, which was an important hint in and of itself. A brief investigation revealed that the transformation was a real physical change, albeit a purely cosmetic one. as if their new bodies were complementing the look they wished to project. Hinata's transformation was identical. Jiraiya remarked, "Well, that's one new talent you've discovered," as he led them home. As they went by, Naruto was occasionally the target of irate glares. Jiraiya's glare was sufficient to cause the few hostile civilians to retreat, but Naruto was left wondering what was going on. Until they were inside the Uzumaki residence, Jiraiya would not provide an explanation. As they passed Ichiraku's, they came to a halt, and Naruto looked at Hinata, who nodded after rolling her eyes. Ayame and Tucci appeared to light up when they saw their favorite client as they sat to place their orders. And his swollen wallet. Astonished, appalled, and incensed at what Sakura had done, Ino distanced herself from her friend's memories. She was aware that Sasuke was dead. No one in Konoha wasn't, but, like many others, she believed Naruto's hand was responsible for the crime. Those three feelings had become more prominent after learning that it had been Sakura. However, her father had always advised her to consider everything twice. She assumed that shock and horror were natural since it was a horrible fact to discover that Sakura was the only person capable of carrying out the deed. Ino wasn't sure she could have made herself do it. It was somewhat surprising that the anger was not directed at Sakura as she would have expected, but rather at the universe as a whole, for making the pink-haired girl's first kill be her first love, the one person she would have died to protect. The blonde's eyes welled up with tears as she gave her friend a hug, and they were as much for Sakura as they were for Sasuke because it was so unfair. Since she doubted she would ever be able to look at the hand that killed Sasuke without feeling the urge to have it removed from her, Sakura considered losing her arm to be a fair price to pay. Even though she didn't look forward to it, it demonstrated to everyone that she was prepared to give up her shinobi career in order to protect the village. She idly wondered who would be telling her it was all over as she finally fell into a sound and healthy sleep, surrounded by her best friend who shared her grief. Tsunade discovered the two of them here, Ino holding her friend tenderly as the Hokage came in. When the elderly woman saw Sakura sleeping, she grinned. Tsunade waited while the young Kunoichi woke her friend, nodding to Ino as Kakashi and Kiba joined them. Sakura wilted as she looked up at the Hokage, dejected. At least it demonstrated how much they appreciated her loss. "It seems obvious to me," the Godem Hokage replied, "that Team 7 has struck a major problem. You are down one member, and we'll have to take care of that soon, and another has suffered both physical and emotional injuries that will take time to deal with. I have two options I can pursue here. The first, and frankly least palatable, is that I disband Team 7. Sakura's heart dropped. She was correct, she understood it. But that would be spitting on the sacrifices that the members of that team have made. So I am pursuing the second option. As of now, the two surviving members of Team 7 are given field promotion to Chunin on my authority as the one under the hat." As the Hokage went on, Sakura's eyes jerked up and fixed themselves on Tsunade's face as she spoke, a wild, unreal hope pulsing through her. "Further, I am ordering Jonin Hitaki Kakashi and the two Chunin of his team, together with Chunin Nara Shikamaru, to undertake the first diplomatic inspections of Sanagakure no Sato to maintain their treaty with us. While there, they are to seek out means, resources and training for Chunin Haruno Sakura such that would restore her to full duties as a Kunoichi of Konoha. I recommend speaking with Suna's puppet, Master Core, as Sakura's incredible chakra control, and the phantom feelings of her missing arm, may permit a form of prosthetic to work. I believe it's worth looking into." The others all filed out, and Ino waved to her friend as she left, promising to return the next day. As Sakura spoke, Tsunade, who was last in line, hesitated and spoke softly. She questioned, doubting herself, "No, Hokage. Sama, why so much for just one Kunoichi?" Glancing over her shoulder, the Hokage grinned. "Because when it comes down to it, the big picture that everyone keeps telling me to look at, it's made up of lots of little ones. People keep forgetting that." There were some differences between Naruto and Hinata's systems after the Crimson Yuki was added. For starters, the resulting violet chakra was stronger than the typical shinobi's blue chakra. There was more focused, if that was the word, and in order to cope with the changes, the couple had to hone their chakra control once more. Fortunately, their elemental affinities did not change, but they had to start over, relearning the majority of their jutsu and relearning the techniques they had previously mastered with ease. Was it truly only gone for a week or so? Hinata discovered that she was capable of performing a Rasengan. But just once. Even though her chakra reserves were increasing, the resources needed to make it work almost completely depleted them. She decided she would rather perfect the gentle storm in the interim, but perhaps she could master it in 5 or 10 years. As evidenced by the sheer number of training posts she reduced to splinters, The Yuki in her chakra caused the output of her strikes to fluctuate, causing her to face a whole new set of issues even there. The nature, if not the extent, of Naruto's issues were comparable. Jiraiya closely examined him as the host of the Kyuubi and Jinchuriki, paying particular attention to the seal on his abdomen, which Naruto's own Yuki was delicately removing. He was only able to patch the seal, which he didn't like. The Toad Sage had no idea how long the seal would last, since the Kyuubi was dormant for some reason he could not even speculate on. Naruto, be careful, warned the young man. I believe it will hold for the next 10 years, and if I can manage to patch it often enough, I can maybe stretch that out by an extra year or 3, but someday, it's going to fail. When that happens, the fox will be free. The original design of the seal bound your lives together, but with your changes. I just don't know. The only place that might have the information I need is the great library of Uzushiogakure in Uzu no Kuni. It probably won't be there now, but I can start to track it down. Much as I might want to take you along, I can't take you both as you are. You just don't have the control you need. But I'll move as fast as I can to get the books I need and get back here. I'll see you when I return. Sarutobi Hiruzen sat in the park and watched as the academy students started arguing about his recent lecture on village management. Sometimes a child was overwhelmed by the obvious things that adults failed to notice. Others in the class talked about how and why new clans formed and old ones were lost or restored, even as his grandson and his friends began to question the sanctity of the clan's autonomy and the restrictions placed upon it. Additionally, Kekkei Genkai and the significance of bloodlines were emphasized and discussed extensively. The professor, as the former Hokage was still called, cleared his throat and regained the future shinobi's eager attention. There is no perfect system of government, he stated, but as a young Chunin has been heard to say, perfection is stagnation. We must always seek to better ourselves and the world around us, not for ourselves, but for those who come after us, that they might dwell in a better world than we did. He had a passion for teaching. With seals built into the walls to drain away any focused chakra and prevent the occupant from using any jutsu, the cell Danzo had been in for the past few months was made to house strong shinobi. Or ancestry restrictions. The only bright spot was that everyone had the same issue, with the exception of a small group chosen when the cells were built. The old Warhawk found solace in that thought, until he learned that Tsunade and Jiraiya were also part of that small group. When the Slug Sannin examined him, he soon revealed the secret he had been hiding since the Uchiha massacre, the reason his personal power had suddenly increased at that time. The eyes of the deceased Uchiha that were taken, and the Shoden Hokage's stolen cells. In his eye socket and arm. These illicit gains had been removed in excruciating pain and without the benefit of an anesthetic. Now, Danzo was exactly what he appeared to be. A cripple who had once been a shinobi, one-eyed and one-armed. In order to unburden those who had been sealed to root and, consequently, to Danzo, Jiraiya had also taken a sizable sample of Danzo's blood. Overall, Danzo would never be the one to guide Konoha to global dominance because of the losses and setbacks he had experienced. He believed his methods would enable them to conquer the world and demonstrate to the Raikage that Konoha was far superior to his thieving little pit in the mountains, as evidenced by the fact that his village appeared to be growing stronger with such weak methods. Unfortunately, only he could see that, and now the very village he had given so much for, not himself, of course, that would be asking too much. He couldn't leave the village if he was dead, could he now? Was condemning him to the fate of a traitor because he attempted to control a loose weapon? Reality was not directly connected to Danzo's mind. That much was obvious, particularly for the figure that peered in at the door, vanished once more, and then reappeared in front of a man wearing a black cloak with red clouds on it and a spiral mask. It would seem that Danzo's have all been taken and destroyed, sir, said the scout. Even the one in his head. Other than your own, I doubt there are any viable Sharingan eyes left in the elemental nations. Tobi, a member of Akatsuki, growled and dismissed the spy. His plans were severely hampered by the fact that he and Kakashi were the only remaining Sharingans. He would have needed the eyes of Itachi or Sasuke to succeed because his own eye was insufficient. Now that Uchiha was gone, he would need to start over in a different way. Luckily, the Sandaime Raikage was a ready-made, flawless puppet who was irrational and furious and begged to be used. In Konoha, Tsunade examined the medical records of her favorite couple and contrasted them with those of the two former Kumo Jinchuriki. After refusing to take down the prices on Team Kurenai's heads, the Raikage listed them as such in the Kumo bingo books, even though she hadn't made their identities public. Backdated to the Chunin exams, each of the diplomats had been named as traitors to Kumo. The old man in charge of that village was not even trusted by the Tsuchikage in Iwa, who had sent Tsunade a copy of the publication along with the comment, "Looks like all that comes out of Kumo is thunderstorms and fiction." It appeared that the Raikage's perspective had some significant blind spots. Now that Tsunade thought about it, it was not unlike what the village council had. She started talking, gazing up at the giant figure of Ai. She put the papers back on the desk and remarked, "It appears that all of you are in excellent health. B and Yugito are showing none of the signs of instability that were evident in Gaara, so their seals seem to be doing an excellent job. Now, since you asked for political asylum until the situation in Kumo can be resolved, I've assigned you a local escort, some genin who understand the customs of your village and their jonin. Sensei. They may seem familiar to you, and they are free to discuss with you their reasons for choosing the Leaf Hit 8.8 if they wish. One of them in particular is of much interest to us, both for his gift at strategy and his unusual Kekkei Genkai, something we have dubbed his 5-fold mind. You'll be accommodated with the team and their sensei as well, and I hope you can get along with them." I gave a nod. Given how strained relations were between Konoha and Kumo as a result of the first Hyuga incident, he had never anticipated this result. Following the second one, which the team firmly believed was a suicide mission to get rid of them, something they thankfully refused to do, and the issues with the bingo books, it was clear that the Raikage was not using the entire deck because it appeared that all of the 5s and 10s were gone, and that being a Kumo nin was in a dubious attempt at best. Although a shinobi was expected to be expendable, they at least desired to be used for a purpose rather than being thrown away on an insane plan that would never work. "Thank you, Hokage. Sama," the ninja with the dark skin claimed. "My team and I will discuss your counter proposal and return our decision to you." While he would have loved to return to Kumo and, if necessary, use force to make things right, his younger brother and the girl as good as his sister had witnessed the treatment of Konoha's Jinchuriki in the present, despite the stories of his early years and the kidnapping, and he desired for them that equality, that indefinable quality of life that seemed so elusive for the demon. Prisons. The decision wasn't made quickly. Naruto glanced at the two seals he had positioned on the wall, one to restrain Yuki and the other to bind mortal chakra. They were straightforward items, a typical seal in intermediate fuinjutsu, designed for secure rooms and prisons to prevent summonings, ninjutsu, and genjutsu from appearing inside the seal's boundaries, he realized. By splitting their chakra into the blue chakra and the red Yuki, Hinata and he attempted to break through the seals as they started the self-imposed training, switching which seal they targeted every hour. As Hinata managed to break through the demon energy seal, Kurenai arrived in their courtyard, creating a blue flare across her newly acquired whisker marks. A few moments later, Naruto used a red flare similar to this to break the other seal. Although they felt they had taken too long, they were somewhat pleased with their efforts. In a fight, 5 minutes could be fatal. But practice and time were the only ways to get better at it. She sighed as they used the jutsu to hide their new features. "The Hokage has sent for us, and Shino will meet us there," she said. They had been compelled to mature so quickly, and they weren't even 14 yet. However, they had brought about a lot of changes in the village. Although some of those were third-hand, her team's actions were nearly directly responsible for their shinobi ranks being strengthened, their alliances with Shio and Suna, and their reluctant but polite truce with Iwa. They outgrew her, so they had something to be proud of. Perhaps she ought to try out for another academy squad this year. There was tension in Tsunade's office, and Team Kurenai members looked around warily. Their team, the Hokage herself, Sarutobi Hiruzen as her advisor, Shizune as the hospital's representative, Ishiguma as the council member representing Uzumaki, and, lastly, the red-haired girl from the Auto Elite, albeit grumpy and reluctant, were the occupants. Shizune took the lead right away. "A blood test and genetic work. Up has produced unexpected results, Naruto. Sama," she began, highlighting the last part of his name. "Combined with further interrogation and intelligence, we believe we have enough to put together a mission. One that has repercussions for your clan as a whole. We have found that this young woman is one of your clan. Genetically, she's an Uzumaki, a survivor of Uzushiogakure. Jiraiya has successfully removed Orochimaru's curse mark from her, and is even now removing Mitarashi Anko's. We have released her into Ishiguma's custody and training. Your mission is B rank, with a possibility of escalation to A or maybe even S rank, depending on exactly which shinobi you encounter." From behind the desk, Tsunade stood up. "Tayuya's sister is secluded at one of Orochimaru's southern bases, and we believe that part of his research is an attempt to duplicate the Uzumaki Kekkei Genkai. Your mission is to rescue Uzumaki Karen, destroy any samples that Orochimaru may possess, along with any research notes, and deny him the resources of this base. Reduce it to ash and salt the earth, Naruto.san. Naruto grinned as Shino, Kuranai, and the Uzumaki couple exchanged glances. The young head of the clan answered, "As you command, Hokage." Sama, old snake. Lips will never know what hit him. Naruto stretched, looking out over the water. He could see the Umi no Kuni coast in the distance on this clear day. It had taken longer than they had anticipated to get to this port town at the southern tip of Cha no Kuni. In addition to their ability to use chakra to climb trees and walk on water, his and Hinata's new form of chakra complicated the traditional shinobi way of traveling, which involved jumping through the trees from branch to branch. Their chakra flow was erratic enough to throw those exercises off. In this case, the shinobi couple was forced to return to their roots, which they were not particularly happy about. They had struggled to balance their chakra sufficiently to scale a rather large and sturdy oak the night before, but where they didn't slip or stick, they blasted pieces of wood to splinters. Both it and the water walking still required a lot of work. Given the failure rate of the water walking exercise and the leaf floating exercise, which was regarded as so simple, it was just as well that they had brought along multiple extra changes of clothes. The leaves were either shredded or thrown skyward with enough force to catch fire. But Hinata had an idea that was a little out of the ordinary but seemed promising: skating. They were supposed to rename the village from Konohagakure no Sato, the village hidden in the leaves, to Taikigakure no Sato, the village hidden in the plain, because they might end up destroying a lot of trees before they could master the climbing exercise. They also didn't want to have to stop frequently to change their clothes each time they attempted to use the water walking technique to cross a river. This would slow down Hinata and Naruto's missions, regardless of how much they might have liked it. Plural, since Tsunade, in her capacity as Hokage, had assigned them another mission to cover their Konoha granted B to S rank, which had not yet been decided by whoever they met. An unclear C rank to determine what was preventing Umi no Kuni from paying Mizu no Kuni for naval protection. The Mizu Navy no longer had to protect the traffic from Umi because the payments were not coming in. They had to get there first, of course. The Uzumaki shinobi's transformation had given them more speed and endurance, which was the only thing that had prevented them from being late for their appointment. So, skating. The idea of creating a smooth enough chakra to allow them to skate along on it while simultaneously forcing just enough chakra through their feet to raise them off the ground, until they had enough control to travel normally, anyway. As a result, while traveling, they had practiced chakra control. Hinata had far more control than he did, and even better, she could see what she was doing and make the necessary adjustments. He was still unsure that his own control was sufficient for the water walking exercise. Her ability to point out his mistakes undoubtedly decreased the frequency with which he was sent flying during the exercise. Naruto returned to the inn to look for his wife, grinning at the scenery. Kuranai had a private conversation with the man in front of her, who was the captain of a ship bound for Umi no Kuni. Pointing to the piles of ryo on the table, she remarked, "That should be enough for our passage, Captain. So what is making you so very reluctant?" "Monsters," was his blunt response. The captain was also a giant, standing at least 7 feet tall. "I saw one of those ships that was destroyed once they'd found it. Something had taken a huge bite out of the side of it. I could see the teeth marks, and whatever it was, the mouth was at least as wide as I am tall. That implied a large animal. I can get you to this side of the main island, but from there you'll be on your own. And probably stranded until the monster or monsters are destroyed." Kuranai's eyebrow went up. "Monsters?" The weathered man stood up. "I've seen many things none would believe in my years on the sea," he responded. "But never have I seen in nature a creature that didn't come in male and female. Anyway, we leave on the morning tide." He collected the cash. The red-eyed Jonin inquired, "Do you have an objection with a short stop along the way?" Hinata used her Byakugan to scan the compound ahead. "Empty," she said, stopping the chakra flow to her eyes. She spoke again after taking a few sniffs of the damp, dusty, salt-red air. "It's been abandoned for years. There's a room down the left passage that smells somewhat familiar, although I can't tell why." Snapping out clear words, Naruto was using the hand signs of the summoning jutsu when Shino sent a wave of Kakaichu to scout the corridor in question. Kachiyose no Jutsu. Mongoose triplets. Each of the 3 mongoose summons, about the size of a wolf, emerged with a little cloud of smoke. The oldest triplet, Riki, wore a blue jacket with a bronze bell on a black collar, while his brother, Tiki, wore a black iron bell on a yellow jacket. In addition to wearing a gold bell and a red jacket, Tavi, the only girl and youngest triplet, had a red ribbon tied around her head in the style of a Hide.8. The speaking had come from her. "What you need us for, Ni.san?" Naruto smiled. His explanation, this place was set up by Snake. Lips, guys, captured their immediate and undivided attention. All mongooses were inquisitive and playful, but when the word, snake, was mentioned, they suddenly became serious, effective speed and destruction machines. We have this side covered, he said, pointing to the left side of the complex, and if you guys can cover that side, he said, pointing to the right, then I'll get you all some shrimp ramen before I send you home. Deal? We need scouts who can handle the traps he might have set up, and I couldn't think of any better team than you three. The mongoose summons left behind tiny clouds of dust in the shape of mongooses, and 3 clear, high voices answered. Such a deal. Kurenai's team was meticulous. They demolished the base to ash and rubble by setting explosive tags and incendiaries after discovering nothing. The work proceeded quickly with the enthusiastic help of the mongoose triplets. However, because of the variations in their chakra, Naruto and Hinata had to make several attempts to activate their tags. Behind them, the demolished compound burned so intensely that even the stones turned to gravel from the heat as the 4 of them, 7 if Naruto's summons is included, strode towards the beach and the waiting ship. Another Konoha team was arriving in a much drier land as the 4 shinobi raced across the main island of Umi no Kuni, with Hinata and Naruto finally mastering enough control of their new chakra for arboreal travel. They were met by a familiar looking blonde guide with a huge fan and 4 short pigtails waiting for them on the border. Standing well back from the border, she questioned, so you would be the inspectors from Konoha? I'm here to get you to Suna. Sabaku no Tamari, at your service. She didn't sound particularly friendly toward the Konoha ninja, but she also wasn't explicitly antagonistic. We'd better get moving. Desert travel is a little different to what you're used to. To make the best time, we're going to use a technique we call sand skimming. It's similar in nature to the water walking techniques, but you have to take into account the differences between sand and water, and their similarities. Shikamaru questioned, once we have that down, what else do we have to worry about? Since her missing arm seemed to have taken away a significant amount of her confidence, Sakura was unable to get up and speak. Desert survival is something we rarely needed in Hai no Kuni. Tamari acknowledged the dry humor in the young Chunin's sarcastic statement by lifting the corner of her mouth in a half-smile. In the desert, the best place to carry your water is inside yourself. Water jutsu are severely disadvantaged here unless you know the real trick of their use. Never travel during the height of the day unless there is no other choice. Midday kills, and midnight is cold enough we'd have snow if there were enough water in the air for it. We travel at night, select watches for the day, keep an abundance of water sealed somewhere on our persons and a fair amount of food and salt too. My advice? Always have a knowledgeable guide, she said with a slight grin. Now, once you've got sand skimming under your belt, we'd better get moving. Looking toward the docks where the ships were being loaded, Naruto stood on the beach. They were not taking any chances they didn't need to, and this was the 4th gold shipment that Umi no Kuni would try. The island nation's budget had apparently been stretched trying to scrape together the money needed for a C rank, but they had warned the Hokage that there was a chance, a good one, at that the mission might turn out to be riskier than they had anticipated. At the same moment that Naruto saw the girl coming out of the shack at the far end of the beach, he also saw the kids, who, judging by the way things were going, he couldn't think of as anything else, picking up sticks and rocks. He heard a low growl, and he was already on his way to the wood.be thugs when he realized it was his. He was a little late at that point because the ringleader threw a stone and screamed, "Get lost, freak! We don't want you here, you monster!" Isaribi's eyes grew wide as she watched the rock slip out of the boy's grasp. Once more. She was being attacked once more because she was different, and she was unable to really deny it because of the bandages covering a significant portion of her body. Since they all assisted with the fishing at some point, she could have easily killed them given what had happened to her, but all the girl really wanted was a cure. How to change her uninvited condition. She clenched her eyes shut and waited for the rock to strike, knowing she couldn't avoid it. And waited. She opened her left eye and looked around. She had been certain she would be struck by that rock. A boy who was roughly her age was standing in front of her. He had a red spiral square in the center of his back and a long, dark orange coat with black flames around the hem. She saw a simple gold band on his 3rd finger as his left hand reached out, clutching the rock that would have hit her. The ring finger. She knew he would now despise her as he firmly squeezed the rock while the kids started berating the stranger for getting in the way of their efforts to deal with the monster. He glanced over his shoulder, and she looked back at him, preparing herself for the hate and rejection as he observed her bandages and their peculiar placement on her body. He shocked her and the wood.be crowd by asking, "Where?" As he turned back to the children gathered in front of him, He growled and the Hite.8 around his neck gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. All I see is a girl who needed help. My Hinata. Heim would never forgive me. Heck, I would never forgive me. If I didn't help those I could. The rock, which was only sandstone, crumbled in his fist as he gave it one last squeeze. I've seen and fought real monsters before, and the worst ones. They were as human as you children, and as judgmental of anything that didn't fit their narrow views. He dropped the pieces and walked away, leaving Isaribi to wonder what his game was. Two figures stood in the alley's shadows, watching this unfold. That's the Uzumaki brat from the exams, isn't it? The stockier of the two turned to the taller and thinner man. The first man smiled under his mask when his partner nodded. The stockier man grinned as the two swiftly parted ways. So that means we get a shot at destroying him, and probably those other freaks in his team, too. Go tell Amachi, and I'll let little fishy Ribi know what her orders are. For once, he might actually enjoy his job. It would just be entertaining to dissect a Konoha nin for what Amachi referred to as research material. As he reported to the red-eyed Jonin, Naruto spoke softly. She was angry, but not at the villagers. Well, maybe a little, but she wasn't about to attack them, he continued. She's the odd one out around here, not treated particularly well. She reminded me of me, a bit. And she smelled like a sea creature. There's a depth to the salty scent that you don't get unless you are one. I don't know, she just smelled fishy. Hinata gasped and started apologizing profusely after the playful light slap to his shoulder knocked him over. She hadn't fully acclimated to her new strength yet because of the short time since the incident that had changed them. Naruto laughed and waved it away, taking it in stride. Hinata was at 6 and quickly catching up to her husband, and the two of them had just reset their gravity seals to 6 and 7. Since most humans, including, much to their dismay, Maeda Guy and Rock Lee, couldn't withstand the strain on their internal organs, Jiraiya had warned them to exercise caution when adjusting them to anything higher than 5. Naturally, they turned them off when participating in the water walking exercise or while on a ship. Falling into the water with that much extra weight would make it difficult for them to swim with their current level of control. Notably, the sea was also a little wet. Sakura fixed Kankuro with her gaze. In a way, it was unsettling, almost unsettling. The boy who was a little older was not wearing his war paint. What? He questioned angrily. Sakura was pulled out of the near trance she had fallen into upon seeing the Suna puppeteer by his sardonic questions. Is there something wrong with my face? Does it not cover the front of my head like it should? Is it not sufficiently face-shaped? She hadn't even heard the Suna medic nearby introduce himself before she'd fallen asleep. Sorry. She dared to ask. She covered her mouth in shock at what she had just said, asking, if you're this good looking, why the paint? Her inner Sakura would have said something like that. The kunoichi with the pink hair thought hard and fast. The last time she'd really spoken to herself was that event. She avoided the idea that she had killed Sasuke, even in her own mind. I've heard that question before, the Suna ninja, who had dark hair, remarked. Given Sakura's attitude during the Chunin exams, he was a little taken aback by her response. The simple answer is, because of the handsomeness. Girls are always about the looks, never about the skills. With the paint, the first thing they see is the puppets, and anyone who can't see past the dolls that I play with isn't someone worth knowing. She just gave a nod. Her words, that makes sense. She glanced at the puppets arranged against the wall of the young man. These are well made, if that helps, she said. Tsunade Sama, the Hokage, suggested that a combination of puppet mastery and medical jutsu might help with my handicap. Kankuro rolled his eyes and grabbed a roughly appropriate sized unattached arm blank. I'll go out on a limb here, he responded, and guess your attempt at humor is supposed to disarm me. Sakura moaned in response to his puns, searching her mind for more. She used making fun of her own disability as a coping strategy, and it was effective. This might not be as bad as she had feared, though, as Kankuro turned it into a contest by measuring the arm against her. It was Kankuro's turn to moan as he looked for more puns about arms. It didn't work. I'll just have to shoulder the burden. But on the other hand, the situation is a little humorous. And Tamari looked on with something like surprise as the duel of bad humor went on. In comparison, the ocean was smooth. With Team Kurenai on board, the ship set out for the turnover point, where the remaining cargo would be taken by the Mizu vessels. At the bow, Naruto and Hinata were practicing meditation while testing their strength without the use of weights or seals. They were twitching each muscle slightly. It would take some time to adjust to the switch between the two, and after training they felt incredibly light and quick. Kuranai stood by the helmsman's station, coordinating while Shino and his Kakaichu beetles covered the stern of the boat. She could talk normally here and they would still hear her because each of her chunin had enhanced senses of hearing. In the event of an ambush, it was a respectable deployment. However, if the destruction of the ships was the result of a set-up, then Hinata secretly concurred with Naruto's growl. The smell of salt was so intense, so overwhelming, out here on the open sea that it took someone being almost too close to smell them at all. She found it odd to adjust to this new, distracting sense of smell, which was far more potent than she had ever imagined. She became even more respectful of Naruto and Kiba. She still respected him, though. How were all the smells they discovered sorted out? The faint ripple of the water in front of Naruto was the only indication of what was going to happen. He heard it as the ship trembled to a complete halt, causing the entire ship to rock lengthwise on its keel. Naruto leapt to his feet and held out his arm for Hinata to grasp as she also jumped up, drawing the two of them to the deck using the tree climbing technique. These heroic efforts were in vain, for the tentacle that swept them heavily from the deck toward the rocks to port, not far from what appeared to be a large rocky island, was a translucent watery thing with several thicker lumps in it that came over the ship's edge. It was a strange creature's tentacle, and a man wearing a white lab coat and a gray suit underneath it looked like the ones Naruto had last seen on the proctors of the Chunin exams. In relation to that, he was familiar with that scent. As his stockier partner grabbed Hinata's arm and dragged her away from her husband's grasp, he fell into the clutches of a man who immediately wrapped his arms around the Jinchuriki, trapping and entangling him. Even as Masumi dragged the blonde shinobi into the depths and placed a breather across his own face, Naruto thought, Yoroi and Masumi, wishing he had been able to recognize them a few seconds earlier. They swam like a brick of gold thanks to Naruto's current buoyancy. Very, very quickly, but only downhill. While Kuranai was occupied fighting the sea monster, literally, a monster that appeared to be made of sea water, and the man leading it, Hinata cried out, Naruto, as she watched her true love vanish into the water, even as a young woman with scales and fins jumped out of the water to lash out at Shino. Her captor gave a malevolent laugh. With his other hand, Yoroi grabbed the girl and began using his chakra draining ability, as if he was enjoying this. He scoffed, don't struggle, pretty thing, but she couldn't see his face because of the veil he was wearing. I'll take better care of you than that boyfriend ever could, now that he's good as dead. But to be on the safe side, I think I'll drain all your chakra first. Do you feel that, the massive flow of energy from you to me? Hinata showed that she was perplexed. No, I don't feel anything. And about that, are you sure it's chakra? The burning sensation that started in Yoroi's hands and gradually moved up his arms, following the paths the stolen chakra had taken as he dropped the girl and started to scream, lifted the bewildered expression from his face. How? Oh. What did you do to me? UAARRGH. Given his threats, Hinata's glacial, icy, and unforgiving expression was understandable as she gazed at him. As the heavy man's screams became incoherent, she responded, Me? Nothing. You did this to yourself. Didn't your mother tell you not to take things that weren't yours? She gathered some of her remaining chakra in her hands and attacked, saying, If you'd asked, I'd have told you. My Yuki is toxic to your chakra coils. Gentle storm. Cerebral hurricane. She exclaimed, slamming her palm squarely into Yoroi's forehead while objectively observing the other shinobi skim the waves before plunging into the depths. Before Masumi pulled him under, Naruto had been able to take a deep breath beneath the water. The bone metal wielder barbed his spikes and blades as they sprang forth after feeding chakra into his skeleton because he didn't want the ninja on his back to escape easily. Unfortunately, before the skeletal protrusions could reach Naruto, the elastic ninja sensed the blades emerging and kicked him free. If Naruto could have afforded the air, he would have cursed. He could see that the environment was in the enemy's favor, and even though the skipping splashes overhead signaled Yoroi's defeat and his Hinata's victory, the blonde Jinchuriki needed to concentrate on the present. He couldn't use his elemental jutsu in this situation. Underwater, fire had no use, lightning posed an equal threat to him and his adversary, and wind had nothing to work with. His bone metal severely limited his range of motion, and the water resistance meant that slashing with his claws would be pointless. Masumi would have him again if he attempted to surface, and he would run out of air otherwise. He hoped he was doing worse than the others. Shino did his best to dodge and duck, but this girl was strong and quick. He would have been in serious trouble if she had truly had a genuine interest in this or if she had any shinobi training at all. She was just trying to grab him, as it was. Probably toss him into the water, hoping that he would be killed by his own colonies. The young Aburame released his beetles and used his chakra. The girl was amphibious and had scales, so it was unlikely that they would have time to drain her chakra. His beetles were for something else instead. Shino's earth chakra protected his beetles from the negative effects of the jutsu, but his lightning chakra sparked them, and the girl felt a moment of chills when he said, "Aburame Hajutsu." Kakaichu shocked. Storm. The transformed girl fell with a sudden ozone odor, a sharp crack of light, and a loud noise. Even as Hinata leapt back over the railing, Shino observed, "Far too easy," and turned to assist his sensei. Amachi was furious. This was not intended to occur. In a month, Orochimaru Sama was scheduled to visit and assess Amachi's progress. He might also approve of breaking up with the redhead he left behind, who was constantly complaining about not finding her sister. Tolerable but annoying. These ninjas were now disrupting his testing schedule and making it impossible for him to get funding. By no means was this research inexpensive, and annoying him in general. That woman was holding his umabozu and himself back by somehow interfering with its senses, a remarkable accomplishment considering that it lacked perceptible sensory organs. She threw kunai at him if he climbed above the deck to steer it, and continued to hurl explosive tags if he didn't, preventing the sea monster from destroying the ship. He needed better base material for the warriors he wanted to perfect before he turned himself into one, so seeing Isaribi defeated so easily wasn't helping. It didn't look good for Yoroi's future when that purple-eyed girl leapt back onto the ship. Consequently, that one was also poor material for the job. He grinned as he made and broke plans to fight in a panic. Who would have guessed that the most appropriate person would be that worthless Masumi? Masumi was curious about what was happening up there and whether he would be able to defeat his adversary in time to get a share of the action from Yoroi. They had been extremely low-ranking men on Orochimaru's ladder ever since Kabuto vanished, which is why they were given this task. He must now murder this brat. The only thing left to do was to retrieve the body. Orochimaru would undoubtedly have a reward for it. Masumi could drown this little monster with ease because his rebreather would last for 15 minutes. If only he knew what he was doing. With some side effects, Naruto had spread his claws and was constructing a Rasengan in each hand despite the water's resistance. He looked for and pushed in some fire. Aspect-head chakra because he was unable to push wind or lightning chakra into his claws down here. Even though it wasn't the wildfires he would have controlled if he had been above the water, the bubbles that were boiling around them suggested some success. The young shinobi shaped his claws into a guiding spiral by using his chakra to bend their shape. When he stopped channeling his chakra into them, they would return to normal, but he was perfectly happy with that. The renegade ninja was also dragged in, his long limbs now a disadvantage as he was forced to choose between losing limbs or being pulled along. The dual Rasengan were pulling at the water surrounding them, converting it into a pair of maelstroms, vortices of destructive water currents determined to destroy that which they trapped. Using the air pocket that the currents created between them, Naruto smiled and roared out the improvised name of his new attack. Rasenjutsu, double maelstrom fists. Kurenai was rapidly burning through her chakra reserves due to the genjutsu she was using on this creature, and it was still all she could do to get it to miss most of the time. As Shino tried to figure out how to defeat it, her Kakaichu were not very helpful. "Hinata," she exclaimed. "See if you can isolate and strike this thing's vitals." Idly wondering if she would now need to call it something else, the younger Kunoichi turned on her Byakugan. "Perhaps the Shigen? Eyes that are purple? It may require some polishing." She looked around the creature and saw that it had no chakra coils. The entire creature appeared to be a summons or a chakra-based construction, but there were 7 centralized chakra pools that ought to be weak. As the tentacle rushed by, she unleashed the gentle storm by slashing out at it with her violet chakra in her hands. The lumps, the chakra centers, and the seawater that caused the tentacle to splash across the deck were all disrupted by the energy pulse that exploded through the creature. Though Hinata had bought some time, the 6th center had exploded before the chakra pulse could reach it, severing the tentacle before the energy could upset the entire creature. Hinata communicated what she had learned even as the creature started to grow back its centers, spiraling each out at the end of its own tentacle. She called to Kurenai and Shino, "It's some kind of summon," and the 3 shinobi rushed to the rail, glancing at the ninja researcher wearing the lab coat. Amachi growled. That girl had to be a Hyuga to see and target the chakra centers in that way, but even they couldn't cause such a pulse. At least not that he was aware of, but he had been duped by those purple eyes. He obviously needed more recent data, and he should be able to obtain it by dissecting these idiots. He felt a sense of dread as he prepared to strike and noticed, out of the corner of his eye, 2 whirlpools forming, one on each side of his umabozu. It threw the extremely tough rogue ninja into the air so high that landing on the ocean was as good as landing on solid granite. Naruto unleashed two maelstroms that drove the unfortunate Masumi through a terrifying and seemingly endless figure 8 pattern as they drove him relentlessly up, past the surface in a twin waterspout that also tore through the center of the sea monster. In an effort to escape the attack, Amachi was flung into the water, only to discover that there was no water. And as it shot from the ocean floor to the weighing ship, just a split second before the ocean returned, something hard slammed into his stomach and grabbed him in midair. Even as Masumi fell to the ocean, screaming until his scream was cut off by a loud crack as he slapped face first to the surface, the exhausted researcher slung over the shoulder he'd driven into the man's belly as Naruto landed on the deck. The Jinchuriki straightened up and threw the man across his shoulder to the deck. He said, "Look, Kurenai. Sensei," with a genuine, fox-like smile. "Instant answers, just add fear." Sakura pushed her chakra slowly into the prosthetic arm, straining her control. The wood was specially treated before being used for this purpose, and it had been taken from the same trees that provided the chakra. Sensitive paper that showed elemental affinities. In order to create an artificial chakra system for the intended recipient, Kankuro had carved elaborate channels into the wood while assembling the limb. These channels contained metal that was sensitive to chakras. After that, he added more wood plating and used leather and steel plates to secure everything. It had been challenging to figure out how to pad the shoulder and create a link based on chakras so she could use it. In order to move the arm around after all that, she now needed to get used to its feel. However, they had also been practicing her left hand skills because he couldn't replace her sense of touch. The pink-haired Kunoichi finally let the arm hang limp in its harness, revealing that she was having trouble with her chakra. Even though it was feasible to permanently attach the prosthetic arm to the shoulder, Kankuro, the puppet maker, believed it would be preferable to finish all the necessary adjustments and training before doing so. Sakura rested for a short while and drank some water before starting to practice once more. The small group of shinobi, accompanied by both of their prisoners, entered the research facility concealed on the island with the information Kurenai had made sure Amachi was only too willing to provide. The threat to roast the man's bollocks without removing them first was especially effective. Finding the cells with a guide, no matter how grumpy that guide was, took minutes. Naruto started going through the numerous notes that Amachi had taken as Hinata unlocked the doors to release the remaining inmates. Amachi complained about losing research material, until Kurenai offered to let him research his own double orchidectomy, and the bound researcher winced in an effort to protect his apples. As he spoke, he noticed the girl's shoulders sag. "There's a lot here on making these aquatic people," he said, "but there's no sign of any attempt to cure or reverse the procedure. I guess he was just going to kill anyone who turned on him." Enhanced strength, speed. The ability to transform back and forth at will. I guess he was planning on perfecting the process and using it on himself. Any failures would be disposed of. Read that as killed, once they were of no use. "Naruto!" exclaimed Hinata. "I found her." Without wasting any time, the young ninja followed his wife's voice down the hallways to a cell containing a young woman of their own age, a girl, actually. There were bite marks all over her arms, and it was obvious that her outfit had seen better days. Though not scars, they were recent enough to still be partially healed. Naruto said, "Karen, is it?" And the girl nodded nervously. "Tayuya couldn't make it, sorry, one of Orochimaru's plans backfired on him, and she was caught by the target. Konoha. They sent us to get you and bring you home." Karen gazed at this boy, who was hardly her own age. They were good enough to take down that sick and twisted Amachi, and based on what she had heard, those two ninja Orochimaru had sent here to watch him were no longer involved. Home, she said haltingly. "Where's that supposed to be?" "In a village that didn't help when Uzu no Kuni was destroyed by Iwa and Kumo once the Yellow Flash was dead. What makes you think I'd go along with that?" Naruto looked from Karen to Hinata and back again. "No better alternative? Besides, it'd be different, you'd be with family." The girl gave a snort. "What, now I get to share a cell with my sister? Real nice of you." Hinata gave a pitiful smile. Karen nearly laughed at the pale shade that appeared on her face. "Well, if you really want to," she said. "But we thought you'd both like to live with your clan." Naruto turned to Kurenai from the amused look of shock that swept across the redhead's face. "Sensei, are we all set?" The Jonin gave a nod. "Shino sealed the notes and his Kakaichu are setting the tags as we speak. Most of the prisoners here made a break for freedom, but I used prison scrolls on a few. They're in the bingo book for things like murder, and worse." They well understood what Kurenai meant by worse, as they were her genin. He turned to Karen, the girl they had just saved, and mentally noted that she should get a full medical check from Tsunade herself. So would you like to come and at least talk to Tayuya-chan before you make a decision? Until you make a choice, I'm sure we can look after you. There's more than a few unused rooms at our place, he stated, raising his hand. Karen hesitated, not quite believing. Why should I trust you? Who's this family you claim I'd be staying with? There's no Uzu shinobi in Konoha that I heard of since the Kyuubi killed the last one. As Hinata giggled, a faint tinkling sound that sent chills down Naruto's spine, he stood and rubbed the back of his neck. Good ones. That would be Tayuya of course, but there's a few others, as she wouldn't be enough on her own, he responded. But our clan representative on the council spoke up in her favor, and the clan head has given her a room, so there won't be much more effort adding you to the deal. In fact, she traded information on Orochimaru to get this mission going for you, even if it wasn't in the clan's interests to do so. Naruto paused to watch as Karen stared at him, divided between anger and fear, angry that they would use Tayuya and the influence of clan and family to humiliate her in this way, and fear that it was all a hoax. He continued after she had trained herself to be patient and her anger was slightly greater than her fear. Family and clan are here to save you, Uzumaki Karen. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. This is my wife Uzumaki Hinata, our team. Mate Aburame Shino and our Jonin. Captain, Yuhi Kurenai. We're here to bring you home. To the Uzumaki district in Konoha. The girl fainted after receiving too many shocks, rolling her eyes back in her head. B and Yugito took a close look around. The two Jinchuriki were exploring Konoha, or more specifically, the non-shinobi parts of Konoha, because neither of them was wearing their Kumo Hide.8 due to their current status in the Kumo bingo books. B had been so upset by the declaration his father had made that he'd lost interest in making up rap. Something that I and Yugito were thankful for. It had been unexpected for them to be granted permission to inspect the Konoha Academy because, as Kumo shinobi, they hadn't anticipated having access to any of the ninja areas. They were a little taken aback by the way the different kids were being treated as they practiced with kunai and shuriken, knowing that Anbu was keeping a close eye on them, a precaution that any cage would have to take. Their guides had been identified. The group the Raikage had dispatched to the Chunin exams with secret directives to kidnap a Byakugan child from the main residence of the Hyuga. Yugito had never been able to fully comprehend both sides of that battle. In order to extend their power into another village, why hadn't the Raikage just negotiated with the elders of that clan? It might have been advantageous for both parties with very little work and some compromise. With the clan dispersed between two villages like that, loyalty problems would have undoubtedly arisen, but they could have been resolved with a treaty or two with Konoha, whose main advocate of war had been that Danzo man. For a moment, she shook her head. Naturally, the Raikage believed that the best way to assess a hidden village's power was through open combat, but they were shinobi. Instead of being the first option, open war was meant to be the last. B was also observing their surroundings and noticing how utility and style, fashion and function, blended together everywhere. He gestured to their daily guide, Suzume. At the academy today, her sister Fukuro was assisting some Inuzuka. In fact, he could see her from where he was standing, outlining the duties and highlighting the advantages of having animal companions. Neither the small kunoichi nor one of those small blue ringed octopuses from the tropics appeared particularly dangerous. Yo, girl. Where can I unfurl? Just lay about and let it all hang out. He groaned. It turned out to be more difficult than he had anticipated to avoid making up rap. But if he considered it, that one had truly felt better. Compared to those he forced, perhaps the subconscious stuff bounced more easily. I just mean, we need some space, to let our minds go and fall into place. The way the words fit together made Yugito slack jawed, inwardly, at least. There was no point in showing it just yet. Then she gave in to the idea. He just rapped, he wasn't trying to do it anymore. After she had recovered, she said, thank you, somewhere to sit and think would be nice. Somewhere. Peaceful, I think. Suzume gave a nod. This way then, she said, guiding them to the Hokage Monument, the village's most notable landmark. There's a big park up there, she said, pointing out, as well as several training grounds. There'll be somewhere suited to sit and discuss what you want to do, how to share your burdens, whether or not Kumo or Konoha is trustworthy. I mean, the choice we made might not be for you, so you may even need to think of alternatives. As they turned to leave, a group of 4 children approached them, followed by a few additional tag-alongs. One of them was a girl from Hyuga. Yugito let out a sigh. She knew this was going to be awkward. Hanabi said, "Excuse me, Kumo-san," addressing B directly. "Could you please explain something to me? Why does the Raikage want the Byakugan so much that he would kidnap me or my sister? Why would he steal it like that?" She had been anxious when Kono-kun had recommended this method of learning, but occasionally the adorable boy. She screamed at herself, "I did not just think that," before confessing in private that he was. And his straightforward approach made progress that more lateral thinking was unable to. She felt a knot in her stomach as the enormous dark-skinned man squatted down, bringing his eyes to her level, despite the fact that they were hidden by his sunglasses. "My old man, who had the plan, I don't think he's right," B replied. The final line seemed a little hurried, but it was important. "Sorry to say, I don't hold sway of how he's going to fight. Don't think he's well, that I can tell, but what I'm gonna say, I apologize. And tell no lies. I won't let him take anyone away." Yugito touched B's shoulder with her gloved hand. As she considered this, Hanabi scowled and glanced around at the people who were all prepared to fight if this was a ruse. She nodded and smiled, a shy smile that brightened her face like a sunrise, concluding that the big man was telling the truth. At least in Konohamaru's opinion. Her words were, "Thank you, Kumo-san. I am sorry to have bothered you." B turned away and glanced up at Yugito, who gave her a nod. Even knowing what they held, this village had treated them much better than Kumo had. Maybe because of that Uzumaki boy's examples of what a Jinchuriki could be and do. She assumed his name was Naruto. The children and the prepared shinobi turned to listen to B's voice. The words simply flowed more naturally now that he wasn't focused on them. "Oh little sprite, that ain't quite right, for what you done ignite, is Yugito and me, the killer B, our Konohas tonight. We got no name, no claim to fame, but we shall stand and fight. Where does our bro, him you should know, he does it 'cause it's right," B rapped, his whole heart in it. "So check it out, we roar and shout, and set our goals much higher, to show that we can live as free, and carry your will of fire." Then something happened that B had never experienced before. There was cheering. When Uzumaki Naruto discovered the experimental notes involving Karen, he became furious. When they used the incendiary and explosive tags and fed them as much Yuki as chakra, he was still a little agitated. When he did, they were thankfully on a ship that was taking them away from the island and quite a distance away, and the island ceased to exist. It would have been a very tiny grain of rice, and it was unlikely that anything bigger than a grain of rice was left. Thousands of kami could see the explosion's shockwave in the sky, and even from a few miles away, it was powerful enough to shake the ship like a terrier with a rat. Naruto said, "Oops," from the deck after landing with Hinata on top of him. "I guess I may have overdone it a little." Tsunade gave the scroll before her a fierce look. The Raikage had sent a message outlining a set of demands to prevent a conflict between Kumo and Konoha. First, all Kumo traders and Jinchuriki in Konoha had to be turned over. This was obvious since Naruto would have been included. As she looked at the next line, she was trying desperately to think of a tactful way to say, "Go to Jigoku." The untainted samples of the Sharingan and Byakugan were to be turned over to Kumo, per item 2. And even went so far as to specify the precise definition of such. It seems that the man didn't think Itachi was blind or Sasuke was dead. The constant stream of information about the Akatsuki to Ibiki and Jiraiya was the only thing keeping the last living Uchiha breathing. She picked up a second message, this one from Iwa, adding to the demands. Even though Ishiguma and Otome were lost to Konoha, their adoption into the Uzumaki clan represented a rise in their status and earned them some of the same healthy respect that Uzumaki Kushina had received while battling them. The Tsuchikage, Oanoki, was a cunning old man with a resentment that seemed to be etched in stone. However, he was anything but a fool, and he was considering a peace treaty that would replace the one that had been in place since the conclusion of the previous Great Shinobi War because Konoha contained 3 of the 9 Jinchuriki as well as their shinobi ranks as of yesterday. He had even provided his own intelligence on where the other 4 Jinchuriki were likely to be. Since Konoha already knew where 3 were, he didn't want to put his 2 at risk of being poached from under his nose, which, if Tsunade recalled correctly, cast a sizable shadow. In Suna, Sabaku no Gara. She was aware of that beforehand. The former Mizukage, now deceased, was the host of the Sanbi, distributing his biju. Utakata of Kirigakure no Sato, who was in self-imposed exile, was among the others. Then there was the one in Takigakure no Sato, Fu, who was probably fleeing from Kiri Hunter.nin. Tsunade initially didn't understand why the elderly man believed she was gathering every Jinchuriki, but after giving it some thought, she could understand why he might believe that. Nobody was going to accept that it was all a coincidence. She sincerely hoped that there was another way to keep her people safe, but it appeared that her options were quickly running out. With Hinata carrying Karen and Naruto carrying Isaribi, Team Kuranai sped through the trees, oblivious to the approaching battles. Despite being the smallest members of the team, the two of them were, perhaps strangely to their passengers, the strongest physically. Not something that, just 2 months ago, either could have claimed. The travelers were beckoned home by the Konoha gates, which were not that far away now. Several teams were returning from their various missions tonight, so Ichiraku's was busy. Team Kuranai, who were supposed to return that day, is probably still at the Hokage Tower giving their report. Keeping the right side of the kunoichi hidden, Sakura picked up the chopsticks in her left hand while throwing her cloak back over her left shoulder. The pink-haired girl had gotten pretty good at using her once. Poor hand, and Ayame had kindly provided a bowl that could be attached to the countertop using a suction cup. According to a foreign language, ambidextrous means right, and she had heard of people who were equally skilled with both hands. In that culture, apparently, everyone was considered to be proficient with that hand. Did that imply that she had developed ambisinistrous behavior? After all, in that same language, sinister meant left. When Naruto's well-known voice called out, "Hey Sakura," the girl in question turned. Naruto and Hinata were there, holding hands and grinning at the sight of a friend. As the couple sat down next to her, she found herself thinking back on the past and smiling weakly. "I'm glad you returned, too," the blonde Jinchuriki remarked. "We managed our mission for the Hokage fairly well, and we managed the clan mission, too. You were part of the Suna inspection team, right? What news about Gaara?" Sakura grinned. She was a little self-conscious as she pulled out her new arm from under the cloak, revealing it for the first time in Konoha outside the Hokage Tower. Gaara has been much better since he started sleeping regularly, and since he can get sleep, apparently the Ichibi has less of a hold on him now. Tamari was flirting with Shikamaru, if you can believe it. It only took 3 or 4 games of shogi and a few more games before they really got serious. As she did, Naruto whistled long and low, impressing Hinata as well. Each piece was expertly shaped and fitted, and the steel and wood plates had a lacquer sheen. As Hinata wielded her newly acquired Zenmi Shigen, which roughly translates to all-seeing purple eyes, the arm appeared to contain chakra pathways and not tenketsu. In contrast to what she witnessed here, those were delicate objects. The only word that fit was nodes. The arm was clearly a work of art, but it was also clearly artificial. A certain amount of chakra had even been infused into the lacquer, and there were patterns underneath it. On Sakura's shoulder, a cherry tree was growing, sending falling petals down her arm to the red lacquered knuckle plates. Hinata could see that Sakura's use of chakra to move the arm was only a small portion of what the arm could do, and it was no more than she would have used to move the actual limb. The arm's metal and wood would also be greatly strengthened by Sakura's earth chakra. As the Uzumakis inspected her arm, the pink-haired shinobi grinned. "You think it's cool now, wait till you see what it has tucked away," she continued. "With all the little tricks we managed to work into this, I can never again say there's no tricks up my sleeve." The surviving members of Akatsuki assembled in a secret cavern in front of a large, unsightly statue. Their leader had summoned them to discuss how their plan would be affected by the changes in Konoha. "Should they continue to gather the Jinchuriki at this rate," said the man wielding a triple-bladed, "they'll have done our work for us, and we can just swoop in, destroy them and take the Biju all at once." "I doubt that," Hidan, the person who went by Sasori, said. "If they get all 6 surviving Jinchuriki, then the odds are good that they'll pursue the Sanbi when it regenerates in the next few years. On top of that, they destroyed 2 of our more powerful members. Itachi was taken down by that Hyuga girl. Sorry, she's an Uzumaki now, isn't she? And Kisame apparently was overmatched by the Kyuubi's vessel. I don't think we can win if we wait that long. We have to strike soon." Former Iwa resident Deidara nodded. When Sasori was correct, he hated to agree with him on anything. "I don't think 2 of us will be enough," he added, expressing his viewpoint. "Even if one of those 2 is Pain. We really need 2 for each Jinchuriki." The Rinnegan's bearer, Pain, nodded. "We cannot afford for them to acquire more of the Jinchuriki, or they will grow too powerful for us to take. For now, Hidan, Kakuzu, the 2 of you are to seize the Nanabi Jinchuriki while Deidara and Sasori acquire the Ichibi. We cannot extract the Biju yet, but we can imprison their hosts until we need them." With Hinata in his arms, Naruto awoke to the sound of Tayuya and Karen in the distance. Trying to reduce the noise by whispering, while the notes on Isaribi's transformation were being examined for hints on how to reverse the process, Tsunade and Shizune were at the hospital examining her. According to those very notes, the process was not yet finished and would need to be finished or the girl would eventually become ill due to the incompatibilities between the different natures of her body. The benefit was that she would be able to alternate between her fully human form and the Kaima, or devil, form. There was still no cure beyond that. The best medic.nin in the elemental nations would still be looking, of course, and Isaribi was being trained in the shinobi arts in the meantime. Even as Hinata started preparing their breakfast, Naruto went to investigate the sound of the door chimes as the couple came out of their room. Wearing the lion mask, the Anbu outside the door spoke rapidly. Hokage. Sama is calling for Uzumaki, Naruto and Hinata to present themselves at the Hokage Tower at 1 hour past noon. It seems the reward for a task well done is another, more difficult task. Good luck, Uzumaki-san. As he ate in silence and his Hinata-chan matched him bite for bite, Naruto flipped that over in his mind. The delivery method is more important than the message itself. The ANBU's voice and demeanor had been respectful and slightly awe-inspiring. It was a novel experience for Naruto in relation to the village as a whole. It had been gradually dragged out of Heishi and Neji, and he had first received it in small doses from Tsunade and Shizune. Then Hiruzen and Jiraiya, but from strangers. It relieved the urge he had always had to stop people, and it was a pleasant feeling. No, monsters. Like Orochimaru from causing harm to others and turned it into a necessity and a source of unrealized power. It was gratifying and empowering. A scroll with an alliance offer was sitting in Tsunade's office, awaiting delivery by messengers. Something so small, to bear the weight of a changing fate, a moment that might, and probably would, alter a world's destiny. As his team pushed themselves hard and practiced speed while racing back to Suna, Kakashi felt the burn. The scroll with the updated terms of alliance, which included the directive allowing their preferred ambassadors to re-enter Hai no Kuni, was in his pouch. He occasionally looked back at his team, and Kiba was the only one who didn't appear to be hesitant at all. The main reason for this was that he was separated from the former Kumo Kunoichi, the Fukuro girl, whose team had been assigned an ironic mission to Tori no Kuni, considering that 3/4 of the team's names involved birds. Or perhaps a portent. Additionally, Kiba was concerned about her. It appeared from the girl's behavior in the village that she shared these feelings, and both of them were too unaware and anxious. A significant shift for Kiba, to be aware of each other's emotions. Kakashi laughed to himself. Before Naruto was kidnapped nearly 5 years ago, Hinata's crush on him was obvious to everyone but Naruto, and somehow, Kiba and Fukuro were able to play both parts. Shikamaru appeared eager to arrive. The goal might be to get there in time for Tamari to take a proper nap, or it might be to challenge her to more strategy games. Kakashi would have bet on the blonde Suna Kunoichi because she was one of the few people who could match the young genius fairly in his favorite games. Sakura had an unexpected attitude. He could tell she was driven by more than just a desire to get away from Konoha. She appeared more motivated to arrive than to leave. The white-haired Jonin had seen the artwork that now occupied her arm, but he did not fool himself into believing he was aware of all the secrets it held. Furthermore, Kankuro had judged her chakra control to be sufficiently good for her to learn some puppet mastery techniques. She was proficient in medical jutsu and naturally had a natural sense of Tsunade's strength, building methods, but this. In order for a medic.nin to transport an injured comrade to medical care without jeopardizing a unit's fighting strength any further than necessary, Sakura had suggested creating puppets that could be directed for emergency medical conditions, such as a mobile stretcher, as opposed to a collapsible stretcher that required other ninja to carry it. The pink-haired Kunoichi was eager to get started after Tsunade gave her a separate mission scroll to work with Suna's puppeteers and medics to carry out such plans, sharing the benefits of that research to both villages. Although, Kakashi thought as he turned back to reflecting on their journey, she and Kankuro did work well together, and he did bring her out of her shell with those atrocities of humor that most people called puns. It also doesn't hurt that they look pretty good together. As their team raced toward Taki no Kuni's boundaries, Naruto and Hinata led the way. They carried classified intelligence as an offer of good faith, along with a diplomatic scroll, an offer of true alliance, just like Team Kakashi. Naturally, the specifics of the intelligence were unknown to the shinobi with the scroll, but that was to be expected. Shino kept a close eye on his friends as they traveled. Although he wasn't sure any girl would be willing to overlook his internal colonies unless she were another Aburame, the Uzumaki couple's effortless intimacy was admirable. And finding someone whose colonies were compatible with their hosts was still a delicate dance. It was difficult to match the level of commitment the colonies demanded. He idly flipped through all the girls he knew, both inside and outside the clan. Hinata wasn't even taken into consideration because she was already married and in love, but the others. Although she was more focused on her shinobi career, Tenten was older and appeared to be more interested in Neji than anyone else. Shoji appeared to be the person there who was most assisting Ino, who was grieving over Sasuke's passing. Sakura. He doubted that would occur, though, because his Kakaichu had complained about her voice's frequency all the way back to the academy. In addition, Sakura and Ino had negative reactions to insects. His closest age female cousin was in the same class as Hinata's younger sister, while the other members of his own clan were either younger or already in a relationship. Shino felt lonely, but perhaps there would be someone out there for him. A strange feeling for a Aburame. As they raced forward, Kurenai was assessing her team's skills. She had seen Naruto and Hinata at the previous campsite set their gravity seals to 10 before they started sparring, and it had taken them 3 hours to exhaust themselves. They were still moving and, at the time, very nearly engaged in combat, even though they weren't using a lot of jutsu because they didn't want to use a flare to reveal their location. She had been shocked when Naruto responded that it wouldn't be safe when she had inquired about their seals being set even higher. Naruto had used the new term of address that had taken the place of sensei, when it was found that she had nothing left to teach them. Anything over a 5 isn't safe for most people at any time, Kurenai. Taiko, she had said. It starts to tear ligaments and muscles badly enough to scar at that point. As Hanyu, Hinata and I don't have that problem, of course, but there's more than that to it. Our physical threshold has no upper limit in theory, but our surroundings are not so lucky. If we were to use these seals for anything over a factor of 10 in an unprepared area, we'd be destroying it with every step. On top of that, it's just a theory, but we'd have to step beyond chakra to Yuki, and that could alter us more than we already are. Tails and stuff. So we're holding ourselves to 10 until we can figure it out. Of course, we're wearing weights now. As Kurenai passed the branch the Uzumakis had pushed off from for their most recent leap, she smiled uneasily. Their footprints had been crushed into the surface of the branch, even though their chakra stretched out beneath their feet to fortify the surface they stepped on. Additionally, they continued to learn more. Kakuzu and Hidan gazed across the valley. The bloodthirsty cultist turned to his companion after failing to spot anything unusual. Despite having similar objectives to serve the leader, neither of them desired a friend nor an ally. In fact, Kakuzu had killed Hidan a few times when he was pushed too far, so, he continued, "Where is this village?" The Jushinist saw the waterfall by following the other Akatsuki's pointed finger. A sturdy cliff and a huge forest with a canopy that reached the horizon were behind it. Although there was a small amount of woodland at the cliff's base, it did not resemble the great tree as described by the mercenary missing.nin. "I don't see it." Kakuzu let out a groan. He would probably have to live with an eternal idiot for centuries if he adopted Hidan's theory of immortality. "Snapping, that's the point," he said. The great tree makes up a large part of the canopy above the falls, and the forest around it conceals the crater in which it sits. There's only one way in or out that doesn't change. The waterfall cave. It wouldn't be Takigakure no Sato if the village wasn't hidden in the waterfall. Slowly walking across the sands was a similarly quarreling couple. Deidara questioned incredulously, "So you don't have one of your little meat puppets there? Why not?" Sasori gave a raspy response. "Because the Jinchuriki round up that Konoha seems to have embarked on has thrown off all our plans by a considerable margin. I was going to infiltrate in the next few months to plant a sleeper, but with the way things are, we'll have to fight our way in. That's going to be a pain for our leader." At the puppet master's pun, Deidara moaned. It seemed that old habits died hard. In any case, why did Suna puppet masters enjoy that hellish kind of humor? Like all their other puppets, did they get a sense of satisfaction from manipulating the language until it danced to their tune? "So, I blow us an entrance, and then we wipe out as many shinobi as get in our way, and we snatch the Ichibi and scram. Is that the plan?" Sasori responded, "We should probably tune it a little, but that's the basic idea," and the two Akatsuki went on with their trip. The new Mizukage opened the big case that contained Samahada's remnants in distant Kirigakure no Sato. Since the bloodthirsty monster had long since left their lands, Kisame had been in possession of the blade that consumed chakra. Here it was now, with 3 large holes that are nearly identical tearing through it. Both the blade and its wielder, whose head had also been returned with it, had suffered fatal injuries. Mei Terumi glanced at the open Kumo bingo book next to the broken sword as she took another look at it. She commanded, "Pass the word, Ow. No shinobi under my command is to go after this young man. I don't care how much the raikage offers, he's off limits. Encounters in the field are strictly limited to observation and intelligence gathering." She didn't think the raikage had that much spare cash to pay the bounty, anyway, given the fines and penalties Tetsu no Kuni had imposed on Kumogakure. The first indication of trouble was not the explosion. With the help of jutsu that exploited the principles of the mirage to see far farther than one might anticipate, Suna scouts had spotted the two Akatsuki agents miles away. Sakura and Kankuro, each with 7 scrolls, had hurried to Suna's entrance. As Sakura worked on her new concepts, Kankuro recognized some promise in them and gave her instruction on how to build them and modify her prosthetic arm. And its unanticipated surprises. Arriving at the gates at the same time as the Akatsuki, they stood and gazed at the 2 S-rank criminals who were prepared for battle. Sakura spat, looking at the walls of the secret passageway between Suna and the desert beyond. As Kankuro pulled out his combat puppets, she remarked, "This could be a close fight," and the larger figure in front of them started to listen more intently. Kankuro retorted, "I blame the narrow minds of our enemies," but their enemy spoke before Sakura could. "Our timing may be a little tight," Sasori gave a raspy voice. "Deidara, think you can confine our target alone, or is it too much of a squeeze?" The Iwa blonde missing nin blew up. He pulled out a clay sculpture, added chakra to make it into an odd bird, and jumped aboard as it started to fly, dropping a variety of explosive clay spiders as large as a man's head as he passed. Why do all you puppeteers have to make those execrable puns? Couldn't you find some other form of humor?" he screamed. This explosive masterpiece would be too powerful for any of them to handle. A pair of chakra-powered wheels built into the arm and hand launched a stream of senbon as Sakura's arm appeared from under her cloak for the first time that fight, a small hatch opening in the palm as she did so. At least half a dozen of the blonde missing Nin's spiders were nailed as he released them, and prematurely setting them off, which triggered the bird he was riding. To protect the 2 Chunin from the explosion, Kankuro, however, had brought out his puppets, Crow and Black Ant. For a few minutes, it rained sand and stone fragments, and probably Deidara, but others in the vicinity had time to set up their own defenses or avoid the explosion. The other Akatsuki grunted as the smoke cleared. His cloak was torn by the flying debris, exposing large pieces of wood underneath the now tattered garment that resembled Sakura's arm. "Stupid Deidara," he whispered. When the cloak's rags were torn from him, the puppet body beneath looked like a scorpion. Who in their right mind rides around on that much explosive? At least he went out with a bang. Since I don't have the time to play nice. Even as the final third of his tail was cut off by wind aspect chakra arc, he was interrupted by a wave of sand that pounded into him and started to crush the limbs of his puppet. Like body. HMPH. Too many insects for my taste. I'll just have to withdraw for now. Gaara moved past his brother and the Konoha no Ichi as the missing nin attempted to jump back from the battle. Sakura recognized the voices of Kakashi and Kiba behind them and answered Shikamaru's from above, where he and Tamari glided on her fan while the shadow wielder called out strategies. Even as the Akatsuki fell to the sand Gaara was guiding toward the legs off the wooden body. The body in front of them exploded open down its back with an incredibly loud snap of hidden catches. The young man who appeared to have jumped from the body started to flee from Suna at unfathomable speeds. Even as a hatch opened in Sasori's arm and sprayed a hail of senbon, similar to what Sakura had done earlier, Gaara's mastery of the sand surrounding him prevented that and dragged the escaping puppet master's legs farther into the desert sands. Gaara's sand instinctively leapt to his defense without any conscious thought, but he was unable to control it because his vision was blocked, even for a moment. Tamari was also unable to push the needles aside because she couldn't use her fan without falling to the ground and knocking Shikamaru down. The other ninja, such as Kiba and Kakashi, as well as Akamaru, naturally, ducked to one side or the other of the passage, where they were safe. Kankuro had no such defenses or protections, and a sizable number of senbon were aimed at him. He was unable to move his puppets from where they were in time. Sakura shifted. She pulled the Suna ninja down with her, slamming her right elbow ahead of them as multiple plates of her arm sprang out to form a shield, keeping the hail of needles away from her and Kankuro. She somehow tucked Kankuro's head under her left arm as she pushed chakra recklessly into her body. Shield of Cherry. Blossom Steel. They hadn't really missed him. He had exchanged places with a poor sap of Asuna Nin using the Kawarimi no Jutsu when the bird exploded, and even then he had taken a measure of the explosion, losing his left arm completely to the blast. He appeared to have two choices. He could first hide, evaluate the threat these individuals posed, and perhaps even divert their attention from Sasori's scheme by detonating a pointless landmark, similar to Suna, and, amid the confusion, grabbing the Ichibi Jinchuriki. Second, once he had enough information about these defenders, he could flee. The main issue was that only one of them was likely to escape in any case. Sasori regained his balance and turned. It was not a good idea to give Gaara more sand to bury him in, whether he was skimming the sand or not. It was dividing the enemy, so there were two targets for his spray. He could have forced him to eliminate the sentries, and this battle would have been very different if that damned Yura hadn't been killed during the invasion of Konoha. He had wondered if anyone else had stumbled over his flesh.to puppet apotheosis when the girl's arm had first appeared, but he had dismissed the idea when a flying rock fragment had clipped her cheek during the explosion. They don't bleed, puppets. After that, she demonstrated that she was more than a one-trick pony by defending the Suna puppeteer. As the shield fell back into the plates of the arm, he had to admit that he was impressed by how impressive it had been. While the spike-headed cable that usually coiled in his torso dug into the stone of the cliff near the passage entrance and lifted him over the incoming spears of sand that Gaara was directing, he opened his robes and took out the first of his scrolls, whipping it open and deactivating the storage seals as he went. Kankuro was momentarily stunned by the figure that emerged from the scroll, and then he let out a loud curse. He whispered, "Crap," and only Sakura could hear him, sweeping the sand from her side as they stood. "That's the Sandame K's cage. We never knew where he'd gone. All this time. This is really bad." Deidara grabbed some headgear from a nearby shop and threw away his Akatsuki robe and the scarred Hite.8, quickly sealing them away. The Hite.8 of a fallen shinobi completed the appearance as the blonde man slipped into position among the Suna ranks, his missing arm replaced by a hastily sculpted version of his detonating clay. The civilians who ran it had fled at the first sign of trouble. Besides his prepared, big finisher, he was running low on that too, with enough left over for one bird or 8 spiders. But since the two had never encountered such trouble before, he simply needed to see what Sasori's chances were. Although they could cover each other's shortcomings and each had their place, this was a first for them in terms of strictness. Even though they had received excellent training and briefing, he was unaware of anyone in their organization who had any real combat experience against Jinchuriki, with the possible exception of Kakuzu. The duration of that ninja's life was unknown. Still, it was a bad sign when Sasori pulled out that puppet. Deidara would simply cut his losses and flee if he also displayed the 100 puppet performance. As Team Kuranai arrived at the valley where they were to meet their escort, the air was thick with the stench of blood. Knowing that this was a bad sign, they looked at one another and started to move forward, accelerating as the sounds of battle filled the air as they made their way to the secondary rendezvous, a clearing a little closer to Taki no Kuni's center. The clearing itself was not deserted. 2 men with the Taki Hite.8 on their brows, wearing ragged red and black cloaks, were engaged in fierce combat with multiple ninja. The taller of the two was engaged in combat with a green-haired adolescent, about the same age as the Konoha Chunin, who was wearing a white outfit that exposed her midriff. She was fighting, struggling, and flagging quickly as though she was afraid to use all of her strength. Fighting her had not been a free ride, but her opponent had no such issues and was overwhelming her. Strangely, the other Akatsuki threw his triple-bladed scythe, barely scratching the Taki shinobi who were running frantically as he swung it by the long cable attached to the haft. He smiled and licked the blood from the blade in an unsettling manner while laughing, stepping into an odd diagram that was blood-stained on the ground beneath him. A simple tug was enough to return his weapon. Naruto guessed that white lines formed on his skin, which loosely matched his bones, and that his skin turned black to highlight his gray hair. With a cry of, "All glory for Jashin-sama," he triggered a spring-loaded blade in the rod at the other end of the cable on his scythe and proceeded to drive it through his own heart, causing it to stiffen and collapse backwards as he did so. What he did next was insane. 3 was a cry as the final Taki ninja, save for the girl battling the other Akatsuki, passed away, blood gushing from an unexplained stab wound to his chest. Kuranai remarked, "This is going to get tricky," remembering the brief explanations found in the bingo books. These two don't generally leave witnesses. The green-haired girl struggled to stay conscious long enough to pass out, falling to the ground in a heap after the missing Nin who was still standing and whose name she believed to be Kakuzu, struck out with a quick blow that slammed her against a tree. While Hinata's Zenmi Shigen saw the color of her chakra change from a deep, verdant, forest green to blue, Naruto stretched his senses to see if she was still alive. She also noticed that the attacker had several cauldrons, which are chakra centers that poured energy into the rest of the system. However, 2 of his 3 remaining cauldrons appeared to be connected in an odd way, as though they weren't actually his. Additionally, he displayed evidence of having 2 more of these outdoor cauldrons, which had just been destroyed. Even as a thin, gentle wave of chakra swept past them and the other man turned toward them, she looked at her husband and nodded, confirming his guess. He said, "Hidan, you idiot," in a tone that was extremely harsh and irate. "Get up, we're not alone here." Nobody could have predicted what transpired next. Sitting up, the second Akatsuki, who had stabbed himself, presumably to kill the Taki ninja, complained. "What do you care, Kakuzu? We'll just kill them all for Jashin Sama's glory, and then we drag that demon bottle back to the leader, and it's done." Kakuzu retorted, "We can't do that, you fool," wishing he had the money to murder this bother a couple of times himself. 2 of them feel like Jinchuriki, and you know Konoha's been trying to catch them all for themselves. Kurenai did not think this would work out. "Shino, you and I get to stop the tall one." She was interrupted by Hinata. She muttered, "Kurenai. Taiko, that's a bad idea. He has more than 1 cauldron, so he'll just rip through your genjutsu like a kunai through rice paper. You and Shino would be best set to deal with the other one, but be careful. I can't see any chakra in him at all. Naru.kun and I will hold off this Kakuzu, and you can help us once you've dealt with the other one." Even as all 4 Konoha ninja rushed from the trees to join the battle, Kurenai had to concede that their argument made sense, and neither of the young shinobi couple waited for the plan to be confirmed. When Kakuzu saw how the Konoha shinobi had divided, he swore. Even though it felt like 2 Jinchuriki now, he recognized the power of the blasted Uzumaki couple who had put Itachi and Kisame to death. But why was he unable to sense the Kyuubi? Even though the girl next to him was unconscious, he could still feel the demon hidden deep within her seal, which was the Nanabi's container. It was concerning, therefore, that the boy's demon was not detected. Furthermore, how had the girl turned into a Jinchuriki? It was said that a seal that would contain one of the Biju could not be given to a person older than a few months, and the fact that she felt like one. Was the leader's intelligence flawed if Konoha had always had 2 Jinchuriki? He was slightly distracted by the purple gleam in the girl's eyes, but not enough to cause him to lose concentration. As Naruto created the hand seal and summoned numerous Kage Bunshin to engage in combat and test the Akatsuki shinobi, Kakuzu thought. The brat married a Hyuga, didn't they? A Hyuga? When the missing Nin's eyes swiveled to the girl, they did indeed notice the slightly protruding chakra coils that nourished her eyes, which resembled veins. Before anything else could happen, she had to go. But there was a silver lining. He and Hidan could gather a sizable bounty here if they were successful. When Hinata and Naruto witnessed Kakuzu's realization, he screamed that he knew she had seen the extra cauldrons, which implied that there must have been an additional organ there to produce them if Naruto was remembering the details that Tsunade had pushed into his mind so long ago. In the case of transplants, a straightforward substitute was integrated into the original chakra network. And that organ needed to be able to sustain life, which meant a brain or heart. Probably hearts, since brains were thought to carry over memories and impulses from the organ's previous owner. He extended his own chakra in the direction of their adversary, tasting the resonance that came back from him, using his whisker sense, which he had more experience with than Hinata. He was a strong man. For instance, even after fighting for an unknown amount of time, he had a lot of power available, even though his chakra reserves weren't as great as Kisami's. He also had strong affinities for fire, water, and earth, with remnants of lightning and wind, as though he had once had those affinities and they had burned out or something. Hinata was using her gentle storm defensive motions, flowing from place to place as needed, even as Naruto was bringing out his bone metal claws. Their enemy was preventing her from counter-attacking, but she was still able to hold him off. She dug deeper, trying to pinpoint the precise difference, but there was a problem with his chakra network as well. Her attention was diverted just enough for one of Kakuzu's attacks to breach her defenses. The blow didn't land, though, because Naruto's wind chakra powered claws tore through the arm, severing the limb and sending it off at an angle to the intended strike. The Akatsuki ninja hesitated for a split second before he jumped back and reassessed the situation, even as black thread like tendrils appeared from both sides of the wound, reattaching the arm as if nothing had happened. As Hinata muttered what she had discovered, that was a crucial clue. It's almost as if he has 3 separate chakra systems. Naru.kun, she continued. He definitely has 3 different cauldrons. And they're all attached to his main network. He can probably live through losing 2 of them. Naruto brought her thoughts to a close. But all 3? Let's see what happens. Tsunade gave the messages in front of her a scowl. Takigakure and Sanagakure had sent one and the other, respectively, with good news. They had been dispatched by summoned creatures, which was a blatant indication that things were not going well in a far quicker and more desperate method than the customary messengers. The Godem Hokage barely had time to look at the wall. Mounted active. Duty chart before snapping commands into the intercom and pressing a button on her desk. Shizune. I need a messenger hawk ready to go in 5 minutes, attuned to Maida Guy, and send for Team I immediately. As she reviewed the instructions she would give I and his team for this mission, she was already writing the message in a broad, legible hand, directing Team Guy towards Suna to support Team Kakashi. She was really getting annoyed with these Akatsuki. Sakura soon realized that the puppet's ability to control iron sand was a challenge that would not be easily solved. She was reliving her old-school magnetism lessons in her mind as she felt the pull on the shoulder and knuckle plates of her arm, which shaped it into the countless spears that then rained towards them. A magnetic field could be broken up in a variety of ways, but only a few of them were permanent. However, she realized that the puppet was the key, not attacking the sand. She jumped up and clung to the passage wall while indicating to Shikamaru. The slothful strategist nodded and tapped Temari's shoulder before the two fell to the passage floor. Even as Sasori swung his concealed blades at Kankuro and his puppets, Gaara's sand had seized the iron sand and pinned it in place as best he could. The earth aspect energies strengthened the material and the twisted cable muscles inside the artificial limb as Sakura knelt and poured chakra into her arm while simultaneously pushing it into her legs. When Temari combined her wind scythe jutsu with Shikamaru's hurried flame thrower technique, the resulting super heated fire was directed at the mass of sand and powdered iron that hung between Gaara and the puppet cage, fusing it into a single immovable lump that, by its very existence, disrupted the magnetic fields. The opening was incredibly small. Sakura launched herself up the passage wall, charging towards the puppet from behind the enormous lump of steel and glass as it fell, and struck as Kankuro's puppets were being shattered. Difficult. She pumped more chakra into her fist and slammed it into the middle of the puppet, directly on top of the kanji for iron on the chest, scattering the puppet's fragments everywhere. However, while doing so, pieces of the now broken construct scratched her in multiple places, and the thin purple film on some of the sharper pieces got into her blood. As she fell to the sand below, all of her strength left her limbs because it hurt and burned like nothing she had ever experienced. Sasori wasted a half-second lamenting that he hadn't perfected his latest poisonous concoction, which would have rendered the antidote useless, before turning his attention to the remaining shinobi and the gathering Suna ninja, equivalent to Konoha's Anbu. He then pulled a scroll from his back, unraveling it with his left hand as he opened the right side of his chest. The girl fell to be caught by the now puppetless Kankuro, who immediately gave her a broad spectrum antidote. 100 red cloaked puppets were released by the scroll, and an equal number of chakra strings were released by the opening in his torso. Even as he yelled, "Performance of the 100 puppets!" Shikamaru's shadow pierced his own, immobilizing him before the strings could connect, enabling Kankuro, armed with what appeared to be chains, to seize control of 2 puppets and start confining the still marionettes. For the lazy strategist, hurry! I can't hold him long, he's too strong. For Deidara, enough was enough. He had been working on his clay in silence. Before Sasori's 100 puppets were displayed, he was still undecided between spiders and birds. Shit, he grumbled, that's a bad sign, and the leader won't want to leave anything for questioning. Oh, well, it's Sasori, I never liked him much anyway. He jumped on the clay bird's back, staying well above the fighting, and used the momentary surprise to run past the puppets and defenders alike. He activated his big finisher as he threw it over Sasori's shoulder and pulled it out as he raced over his head. It would have been equivalent to calling the ocean a little damp or K's no kuni midday a little warm to say the explosion was large. In addition to pushing the desert's sand in waves, the explosion heated it up enough to turn it into glass, not the clear, pure glass that Suna glassblowers could create, but the grimy, cracked, and bubbling material that results from a lightning strike. Gaara barely managed to get a barrier of sand in place to protect those in the passage, one he had to constantly refill as the blast's heat turned the sand into glass, while Sasori and his puppets were unprotected and consumed by the heat and force of the detonation. Deidara had escaped by the time the destructive blast was over, and the entrance to Suna was blocked off with a solid glass barrier that was at least 20 feet thick. There would be no sign of Sasori and his puppets. Kurenai decided that genjutsu was a bad idea and gave it up. Whatever kept this Hidan going instead of chakra essentially ignored her attempts to link her illusion techniques to it, so it simply wasn't working. Furthermore, she and Shino had to continuously avoid the scythe that the missing Nin recklessly wielded. Neither the location nor the force of the blow seemed to matter to him. She was so inspired that she threw most of her chakra into her next genjutsu, which was a straightforward illusion with a special quality, even though it couldn't impact a big area. Instead of altering her target's senses, it produced a real visual illusion. In this instance, she created the appearance of blood on the scythe as she narrowly avoided the next scythe sweep. She felt the fabric of her right sleeve, but the blade missed the skin. As soon as he saw this, the Akatsuki ninja grabbed the scythe and licked the blade, not tasting anything. The Konoha Genjutsu mistress yelled, "Shino, why do you think he did that?" She would be foolish not to capitalize on the fact that he was better at fly analysis than she was. Being a fool was definitely not one of Yuhi Kurenai's many attributes. The blood must be needed for something, the young Aburame muttered. Perhaps to form some kind of physiological link between the donor and the recipient, most likely through the use of whatever form of energy he uses instead of chakra. It isn't chakra or yuki, both of which Hinata could sense, and I doubt it would be Shen, or divine energy. But to get that effect we observed earlier. I wonder. Kurenai. Taiko, I have an idea. The Jonin Kunoichi dodged a slash from the irate scythe, wielding madman, and nodded, allowing her subordinate to proceed. Shino then unleashed a huge wave of insects that rushed the missing Nin as he flailed wildly with his scythe. Even as Shino started making hand signals, Hidan emerged from the cloud of Kakaichu beetles and rushed the Chunin, who brought out his own weapons and started a defensive dance to buy time for his insects to return. Shino dropped to one knee and clutched his arm as soon as the Kakaichu swarm returned, and Hidan's scythe slipped past Shino's guard, tearing at his arm and drawing blood before Hidan leapt back and licked at the precious liquid, savoring the coppery tang that told him it was actually blood. The Akatsuki shinobi then stepped back into his ritual circle as his flesh turned black once more, white lines appeared over his bones, and the white section over his face appeared. Kurenai moved to assist Shino as the strange man pulled a collapsing blade from his robe and laughed uncontrollably. "Get ready for the afterlife, you little shit," Hidan yelled as he drove the spike into his own heart, not wanting to drag out this ceremony too much while the Jonin was still at large. Hinata had identified the problem with this man's chakra system. There was no tenketsu on him. The chakra simply flowed through a horde of extra fine coils that looked nothing like threads after emerging from the cauldrons. Her usual targets were no longer there without tenketsu, and the way those threads kept moving around made her pretty sure they could replace and replicate themselves quickly enough that the only truly vulnerable points would be the hearts. Knowing that a Hyuga could easily reveal the secrets of his power, even if she had a henge to cover her eyes, Kakuzu moved quickly and charged at the girl. He knew she was too inexperienced and unskilled to handle his pure taijutsu attack, but he wasn't going to underestimate her, so he thrust his leg forward in a devastating snap kick that hit something solid and unyielding. As the Jinchuriki released the chakra that shaped the plates, Kakuzu's fully extended foot rested on the cross, and Naruto stood in front of the missing Nin with his arms folded in front of him. The arms were plated with bone metal that extended up from his wrists and now retreated back into his arms. The missing Nin leapt back, threads reaching out to reattach the limb before he landed, and he swung both hands across and outward, severing the leg. Then two big bundles of the threads, each with an animal mask on it, pushed up above the Akatsuki ninja's shoulders. Even as Naruto and Hinata frantically raced through the hand signs for their own jutsu, Kakuzu unleashed a seal. Less jutsu. The masks' mouths dropped open as they aimed roughly at the Uzumaki couple standing in front of him. The brown, striped mask fed earth, in the form of stone and dirt, into the flames, while the red mouthed mask appeared to gather fire in front of it. The Akatsuki bounty hunter roared, Yoden, pyroclastic wave, and a gout of extremely hot lava blasted in the direction of the two Konoha ninja, where it encountered their retort. Hinata shouted, "Sweeten, tidal wall," and sent a huge wall of water hurtling in the direction of the lava stream. Naruto dove into the water and cried out, "Raiden, static separation," as it went by. As the lightning charged water continued to rush in Kakuzu's direction, he created his own water wall, breaking up the lava stream and turning it into vapor in the process. As he dropped his water wall, the clouds settled around Kakuzu, who saw no danger in the nearly transparent fog. The fire mask then opened its mouth again, and the fire gathered again for the lava technique. Even as the explosion ate up the two masks and the hearts behind them, the Akatsuki heart thief was slammed to the ground by the tremendous blast of flame, which caught him off guard. However, Kakuzu was quick enough to place himself in a reversed water prison, saving his life. For the time being. He was weaker than he had been in years after the other masks were torn from him until he had time to replace the missing hearts. He snarled out his question while glaring at the two Chunin who had brought him to this point. How? When asked, basic chemistry, Naruto replied. You better believe I paid attention about how to make things explode. When you run the right electrical current through water or steam, you get two colorless gases, very excitable ones, that will explode with the slightest spark. Which you so thoughtfully supplied. The bounty. Hunter sneered, you're still in over your heads, child. He raised his hands and began a very powerful jutsu. If I can't capture you, I'll just have to kill you. According to my sources, the Kyuubi, whichever one of you is carrying it, will regenerate in the next 10 years or so. No big loss. For decades, he had not required hand signals, and now. The boy's lack of bleeding was Hidan's first clue that something wasn't right. The boy was not responding at all, even though the blade was piercing his heart. The Jonin woman was startled when the real Shino appeared from the trees, only to explode into a swarm of insects gathered around a log. And even though the pain was still as intense as before, it wasn't going away, and he was beginning to feel chilly, and the wound wasn't getting better. The zealot asked, Jashin, as blood spurted from his mouth and up his throat. What's happening? Why have you forsaken me? Aburame, the youth, raised his voice. I apologize if I worried you, Kuranai. Taiko, but I needed to see if the signature of the source would have a negative feedback effect on the wielder of the jutsu. I had my Kakaichu harvest some of his blood when they swarmed him, and they smeared it on his blade when I substituted for the bugs and the log. It seems that his jutsu sacrifices another's potential lifespan to extend his, but now, he just sacrificed himself, forever. The loop is constant now, and what would be recovered is taken away just as fast, leaving him with his original life force. Which, since Hanada.san told us he has no chakra of his own, is none. Still, if you would be so kind? Kuranai held up her hands and waved them through the jutsu signs. Kaden. Phoenix Fire Storm. The Jashinist vanished in an instant, and the two hurried to their teammates. Sweden. Grand Deluge. Kakuzu turned to face his prize as the enormous stream of water, a primordial level torrent, poured towards his opponents. Only to hear the voice of a young man who was cool and collected. Doden. Shattered ground. The boy in the dark glasses, who was now standing between Kakuzu and the Jinchuriki he had been sent for, who was being roused by the Konoha Jonin, caused the earth beneath his feet to rumble and split, splintering into a deep pit that sucked away all the water. He gazed blearily at the Aburame and his beetles, who were still buzzing around him. The three members of Team Kuranai looked at one another and nodded as the Akatsuki ninja fell, tumbling into waste. Deep water. They all recognized a single jutsu, and now they moved in perfect unison through the hand signals. As they finished and released the jutsu, Kakuzu was stepping up onto the water's surface. 1 foot was still below the surface, and his threads were coming out of every parting point in his body, completely soaked. 3 voices called out as one, and there was nothing he could do. Raiden. Lightning Spear. The thunder that accompanied the lightning was so loud that it was deafening. The 3 lightning bolts that merged into one blazed so brightly that everything was white and all shadows were exiled, and the scream of the one named Kakuzu was never heard at all. Shikamaru thought, the aftermath was a real drag. A messenger hawk would be sent to deliver a preliminary report, but it would take days, if not weeks, for the Sanagakure craftsmen to clear the passage sufficiently for the Konoha diplomats to return home with their reports. Nor had it helped that Team Guy had arrived outside the glass barrier. The Konoha backup had quickly located the enormous glass flower that had been left behind by the huge explosion, and it had been easy to cross it. If it's hot. The glass became so hot from Kei's no Kuni's midday sun that it almost burned their feet through their sandals. The young Nara had been the one to suggest that it would be much more efficient to just carve out a new passageway a little way away from the glass. A Godem Kei's cage had been proposed by the Suna Ninja Council. Of all people, Gaara. However, he had declined the job. I have not earned it, the Ichibi Jinchuriki had declared. I do not possess the skills or patience for it, nor the experience. Should I be offered the position of Rokudame at some future time, perhaps I will feel differently, but for now, no. When Team Kakashi presented the scroll lifting the protocols against Suna Ninja in Hai no Kuni, that was their first assignment. The council had reluctantly released their plans for Gaara's ascension to the post, but had been convinced to consider another, a man known for his neutral stance, who refused to leave Gaara unburdened by some duty. Kankuro was also instructed to consult the top medic.nin in the elemental nations regarding the Medi puppet designs in the village. Konoha. Deidara had no interest in his report. He had boasted and bragged about how easy this would be just a week ago, and now he had to tell everyone that they had failed. Against one Jinchuriki, even if that Jinchuriki had been supported by a number of knowledgeable, if unidentified, ninja. He glanced around as he addressed those still in the room. He was certain they would be here as projections, if nothing else, given that this stronghold was closer to Suna than Taki and that the other Akatsuki pair preferred to walk. However, Hidan and Kakuzu's absence could be ascribed to a variety of factors, including a close pursuit, so he didn't give it much thought. "This is troubling," the leader said, addressing the participant who most closely resembled a Venus fly. "Trap. Zetsu. Locate the other two. If they're having trouble with pursuers, assist them, and get the Nanabi back here at once." I gazed at the vast expanses of devastation and destruction that had been wrought inside Takigakure. The green-haired girl, Fu, had no friends among the shinobi who were left here, as many of them had been killed. The two Akatsuki killed the Taki Jinchuriki's two strongest supporters, and the village elders remained steadfast. Only a few minutes after the two Akatsuki had been dealt with, his team had arrived, and the cleanup was the only task left. Someone had been needed to keep an eye on Fu and the weary Team Kurenai while they slept. Though the green-haired Jinchuriki wasn't far behind, Naruto and Hinata had obviously recovered the fastest. Killer Bee had whistled low at the younger shinobi's achievements. He had rapped, "Dang, boy, you done kicked ass, I guess your first score is a pass," which brought Yugito's fingertips to his ribs. Naruto had simply nodded and embraced Hinata more. The elders had considered the idea of an alliance with Konoha but had rejected it before the mass memorial for the fallen Taki ninja was scheduled for the following day. "The monster is the source of the trouble we just went through," one elderly woman that I found especially offensive said. "We have stricken it from our shinobi roster and it will be executed to ensure no one ever uses it against us." At that point, the four Konoha shinobi who had been touched by demons almost lost their cool, but thankfully I saved the day. He nodded to his brother, who smiled and waved his hand behind him at Team Kurenai's Chunin. "If she isn't on your roster, she can't be one of your missing .nin, right?" he asked. "So if we just found a strange girl on our way to Konoha, and adopted her, then you couldn't call out anyone for her, unless you wanted to go up against the strongest hidden village in the elemental nations worth the name. Am I right?" With reluctance, the elders nodded. "That may be true, but first the Jinchuriki would have to escape our village's cells." Kurenai was kind of anticipating what would happen because she had witnessed her two Hanyu Chunin steal away, to be replaced discreetly by two of Shino's bug clones disguised as the young couple using henge illusions. Shouting, a Taki shinobi staggered into the rooms. Even as one of the more composed elders assumed command, Kurenai's suspicions were aroused by the panic that engulfed the re-entry of the two Uzumaki ninja, who switched with the bug clones. Honored elders. The Jinchurikis escaped. Two demons helped it. They broke through the doors and then they all went up the great tree, trying to escape along the branches to reach the outside. He gestured to the new shinobi, saying, "Enough. You." He paused and glanced at the shinobi who had sounded the alarm, the one he had just assigned to expel the foreign ninja from his country. "Escort these outsiders from the village, and make sure they leave Taki no Kuni. Everyone else, organize the search and pursuit teams." Which way did these demons go? He swallowed, the shinobi. They were heading south, so they might have been heading for Hai no Kuni. But that might be a ruse. If the trail were to vanish, most trackers would keep going in an attempt to pick it up later, but if they instead go somewhere else, I couldn't say. "I'm just a Chunin, sir." "No matter," snorted the elder. The elders then swept out, ignoring the Konoha entourage that followed the Chunin. I doubt they'd actually be going to Konoha now. But those are the shorter branches, and from there they have easy access to such villages as Oto, Suna, and Iwa. Before Fu dropped her henge of an unimpressive Taki Chunin, they were able to keep up the pretense long enough to reach halfway to the border, and Naruto informed them of the situation and the plan. "If their search parties are ahead of us, they can't find our tracks properly, so I sent a few clones along the branches with orders to disperse once they cleared the edge and left a bit of a trail towards Iwa. After that, Fu hanged so we could have them order her to escort us out, although that was a bit of a gamble, but the way they were treating us, I figured they wouldn't want strangers around while they dealt with their dirty laundry. Since they already removed her from their roster, that means she's free to choose where she wants to go. Fu expressed her own viewpoint. Konoha is as good as any and better than many, she stated. If they don't want me, then at least I'll get the chance to think about where to go. Zetsu growled, you're not going to like hearing this, at pain. Hidan and Kakuzu won't be coming back. They were beaten. Somehow they killed Hidan, and were able to make it stick. On top of that, they took down Kakuzu as well. Admittedly, they were both weakened somewhat by the assault on Taki to get the Nanabi, but dead is still dead. The Akatsuki's leader vowed to himself. This would have been a serious issue if Tobi hadn't discovered the Rokubi Jinchuriki in Cha no Kuni. They were unable to seal the Biju into the statue just yet because it required the 5 Biju that came before it to warm it up, so that the statue wouldn't just blow up, and sealing each Biju would take longer and longer. The Ichibi have 3 days, the Nibi have 5, the Sanbi have 7, and so forth. However, everything was awful. Konoha currently held more than half of the Biju, a balance of power he believed he could exploit if it weren't for one stark fact. Although their relative strength was higher than that of the other great hidden villages, Konoha had never initiated a war, but they had a disturbing propensity to end them. Only during the strikes in retaliation for their fallen ally, Uzushiogakure, had Konoha been the aggressor in the last century. The likelihood that the Akatsuki would have to attack Konoha directly was growing, and that would take preparation and time.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.